A Small Secret. Amish Romance Secrets, Book 3. Written by Samantha Price. Narrated by Susanna Coleman. Chapter 1. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Psalm 23:4. Normally Sarah liked to cook, but tonight baked breaded lamb chops were on the menu, and the smell rising from the meat as it sizzled in the pan sent Sarah rushing for the outdoor convenience. She thought it was called morning sickness because it happened only in the morning. No one had told her it could happen throughout the day as well. In fact, for Sarah, it seemed to be happening all through the day. She considered that it should be called all-day sickness, rather than morning sickness. After she was finished being sick, she quickly splashed her face with the icy cold November water that flowed from the well around the back of the house. As she usually did after one of these episodes, she plucked a sprig of fresh mint and popped it in her mouth as she made her way back to the kitchen. Mint was the only thing that Sarah could find to settle her nausea. As Sarah pushed the back door open, her mother, who had her hands on her hips and a very sour expression on her face, met her. "Oh no, she's figured it out. She knows I'm expecting." No, she couldn't possibly know for sure. I'm not even showing yet, she thought. The only clue of her early pregnancy was the terrible nausea that she'd had for a little over 2 weeks. "It's that dreaded flu, Sarah. Were you sick again this time?" her mother asked. Sarah nodded her head at her mother's question, pleased that her secret was still safe, but not pleased that she had to keep this secret from her parents. However, did she get herself into this situation? If Sarah had heard that someone else in the community was not married and expecting a baby, she would have had a very low opinion of them indeed. And now, here she was in that very same situation. Thankfully, the flu was going around the community and many were quite ill, so that gave her a good cover-up story for the moment. Her mother put the back of her hand to Sarah's forehead. "You don't seem to have a temperature, though." Sarah barely had the strength to speak, but managed to say, "That's good." "Go up to bed and I'll bring dinner up to you," her mother demanded. Dinner was the last thing that Sarah felt like. The last thing in the world she wanted to think about was food. She couldn't arouse suspicion and tell her mother that she wasn't hungry. And besides, her mother's tone was firm, and Sarah did not have the strength to argue. She was thankful that at least she would be able to hide in the safety of her room and wouldn't have to smell the meat cooking any longer. "Thank you, Mom." As she carefully made her way up the stairs to her bedroom, she wondered if her mother suspected her condition. She was sure she saw her eyes flicker toward her slightly swollen belly. Was she checking to see if my belly is increasing? Or maybe it's my guilty conscience, she thought. Either way, Sarah was glad to be able to lie down because when she was lying down, she didn't feel quite as sick. Her mother called after her. "I'll make you some hot lemon and honey." Hot lemon and honey in boiling water was the standard remedy her mother used for everything, not just a cold or the flu. It was her standard cure for everything. "Thank you, Mom." 1 squeezed fresh lemon, 2 tablespoons full of honey, and a mug of boiling water. "That will fix everything," her mother said. If only it were as simple as that, Sarah thought. If only I could take the honey and lemon drink and I wouldn't be in this situation anymore. There was no cure for what Sarah had. Sarah realized that for the first time in her life, this was something she could not change her mind about, and something that she could not get out of. She could not change her mind on a whim and say she didn't want to be an unmarried, expectant mother anymore. It wasn't like a game of volleyball where she could stop playing whenever she wished and have someone else take over. It wasn't like school where she could pretend she was sick and stay home. Everything Sarah could think of in her life up to this point, she had always been able to change her mind about, or find some way out of. These circumstances were different. Why couldn't her life be plain and simple like her 2 older sisters? They were both happy to stay and live within the Amish community, and had both fallen in love with Amish men. One was about to be married, and the other was already happily married with a baby on the way. That's the trouble, Sarah thought, with having 2 older sisters. The younger one is supposed to turn out just like the older ones, just as if they were cut from the same cookie cutter. Sarah felt she had dismally failed to live up to the life that her older sisters were leading. I guess the problem was that Benjamin and Jessie didn't have a younger brother. She tried to see the funny side of things, as her 2 sisters had married 2 brothers who they had practically grown up with. Yet, She had to be the one to fall in love with an Englisher. Sarah sighed loudly as she thought of how her older sisters always had things work out so well for them. She could already see that her life would be hard in comparison with theirs. Nothing ever seems to work out easily for me, she thought. I fell in love with John as soon as I looked into his blue eyes. She closed her eyes and remembered that first time she gazed into his eyes and felt lost in his presence. Nothing in the world up to that point had given her the feeling of elation as John spoke his first words to her. She didn't even remember what he said. She could only remember how her heart seemed to dance as if nothing in the whole entire world mattered at all. It was too late for my heart to disregard him for being an Englisher. When he told me that first night that he wasn't really Amish and was just visiting his Amish cousin, we were already deeply in love. Even though it was mighty chilly outside, Sarah pushed up her bedroom window just a little for the fresh air that always made her feel better. She stood in front of the window, even though the cold wind was sending chills up and down her spine. Sarah took several deep breaths before she closed it and sank into the coziness of her familiar bed. As she placed her head on the softness of her pillow, her hand automatically reached for the well-worn photo of John she kept under the pillow. The photo had been inside his very first letter to her, and she had gazed at it longingly every day since. The photo was nice to have for now, so she could see his handsome face anytime she wanted to, but Sarah longed to be able to see him in person again very soon. She craved to look into his deep blue eyes and to have his strong protective arms around her once more. She didn't know why she felt about him the way she did. It was just that everything seemed a lot better when he was around. Sarah ran the tip of her finger over his face, then drew the photo to her lips and kissed it. She let out a large sigh. They only had 2 short months together, but in those 2 months they saw each other every single day. At first, Sarah was pleasantly attracted to his handsome looks, but then, as she got to know him, his personality far outshone his looks. Sarah had found herself also attracted to his intelligence. Compared to Amish men, John was able to speak on a whole range of topics, and he had even traveled to different countries. Sarah loved to hear him talk of his adventures on his travels. In comparison, Sarah thought Amish men dull as they never go anywhere and just do the same thing over and over again. Sarah wanted the life that she saw she could have with him. Since Sarah, like most Amish, only had a grade 8 education, John said he would show her how to get her GED so she could go to college and have a career. Sarah had never even known these things were possible before she'd met John. Being a good wife, bringing up well-behaved children, and keeping her husband happy was the life Sarah had previously envisioned for herself. John inspired her to want to see what she was capable of in the English world, but now, with the baby coming, Sarah knew she had to rethink all of her previous plans. The baby had become Sarah's main priority. Chapter 2. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Joshua 1:9. Sarah, can I come in? Sarah quickly pushed the picture of John back under her pillow at the sound of Liz's voice and sat up. Liz had grown up Amish but was now very much English. Circumstances had caused Liz to be a long-term houseguest of the Millers. Sarah Miller! You may have fooled your mother with that little performance, but you haven't fooled me. Liz had been sent up with a mug of the hot lemon and honey drink. She set it down on the small nightstand next to the bed. Liz, I'm not sure what you mean. Sarah's heart was thumping. She was not ready to tell anyone. Even her 2 sisters, Kate and Annie, didn't know her secret. She hadn't told her sister Kate because she was expecting her own baby in a few months, and her other sister, Annie, was just weeks away from her wedding. Sarah didn't want to burden either of her sisters with news of her sorry situation at such important and joyful times in their own lives. Liz curled a long lock of bleached blonde hair around her perfectly manicured long pink fingernails. Let me see. 2 months ago you ran away with a man you were ready to give up your family for, and a man who you were willing to give up being Amish for, a man who you professed to love above all else. Now weeks later you start throwing up and can't stand to be around cooking smells. Liz stopped to draw a breath and sat down on the end of Sarah's bed. I've known you for most of your life, and I don't remember you ever being sick. Liz waited for Sarah to say something. When Sarah did not respond, Liz said, Is there anything you want to tell me, Sarah? Sarah shook her head under the intense gaze of her friend, and a tear trickled down her cheek. Sarah, look at me. Liz's tone was firm, and yet Sarah still avoided eye contact. "You're pregnant, aren't you?" "Hush, Liz." Sarah looked up at once. "You mustn't tell anyone." "Who am I going to tell? Of course I won't, don't be silly." Liz reached forward and wiped another tear away from Sarah's cheek with her fingers. "Oh, Liz, I don't know what to do." Sarah opened her nightstand drawer and pulled out a carefully ironed handkerchief that was in front of her letters. Liz looked at Sarah's midsection. "How far along are you?" Sarah unfolded the cotton handkerchief and carefully dabbed the tears from her eyes. "Around 3 to 4 months, I'd say." "Have you told John?" Liz asked. The tears started to flow freely down Sarah's cheeks at the mention of John's name. "He wasn't happy?" "Sarah, tell me what he said," Liz asked. They were interrupted by a knock on the door. "I've got Sarah's dinner." The voice was Jacob's. Liz raced to open the door and take the dinner from Jacob. "Thank you, Jacob. I'll give the dinner to Sarah." Jacob always liked to know everything. "What's going on in there? I heard Sarah crying. Is she all right?" he asked. Liz took the tray from Jacob while she stood in his way so that he couldn't see in. "She's just feeling a little sick. She'll be okay," Liz replied. Jacob was moving his head from side to side, trying to see around her. "Run along now, or I'll tell your mother you're making a nuisance of yourself." Liz spoke in an extremely angry voice. From her bed, Sarah could see a glimpse of Jacob shaking his head. Liz closed the door while he was standing there. "Put it down there, please, Liz, thank you. I can't stand the smell of it. I can't stand the thought of it." Liz put the dinner down in the corner of the bedroom before she sat back down at the end of Sarah's bed. "Now tell me what he said." Sarah wiped her eyes again before she took a deep breath. "After Annie and Jesse brought me back home from the train station?" "Yes, when they rescued you from running away with John. Go on." It was hard for Liz to be quiet and listen because she was so used to being the one doing all the talking while Sarah was naturally much quieter. "Well, if you be quiet, I'll be able to tell you," Sarah said. "Sorry." "We arranged to meet 4 weeks after that. I was going on Rumspringa to be with him. Only thing was, when I phoned him to make the final arrangements, he seemed different, almost disinterested. So I didn't bring up the subject of us getting together at all, and neither did he." Liz raised her perfectly shaped English eyebrows. "You haven't even told him about you having his baby?" Liz asked. Sarah shook her head. "It's as if he's lost all interest in me. Yet the funny thing is that he writes to me nearly every day. If he didn't write, I would be sure he didn't want any more to do with me." Liz leaned forward in an effort to emphasize what she was about to say. "You must tell him, Sarah. You must." Sarah shook her head. "No, I won't tell him. I want him to want to be with me. I don't want to be with him if it's only for the sake of the baby." Liz was, for once, silent. Sarah took Liz's silence as a sign of disapproval of her decision. "I thought you, of all people, would understand. I want him to be with me because he loves me. I don't want him to be with me out of a sense of duty." Liz pursed her lips tightly. "No, I don't understand at all. He got you into this. I mean, he needs to take responsibility for what's happened. What about financial support? You can't stay in the community. You'll have to get somewhere else to live, and that'll cost money. Then you won't be able to work because you'll have the baby to look after, and babies are so expensive." Even though Sarah was a little upset, she couldn't help but notice that Liz started to lapse into speaking Pennsylvania Dutch, something that she hadn't uttered since she left the community quite some years ago. Liz was right, though. Sarah wouldn't be able to stay in the community. She would have to think about finding somewhere to live at some stage. "Stop. I can't think about all that right now. Please stop." Sarah covered her face with a pillow. It was all too much. If only she could turn back time and make a different decision and not make the foolish mistake that she had made. She had got carried away with notions of love and romance without thinking of the ramifications of her behavior. Now, the harsh reality of her actions had set in. The reality was that she had ruined her life. She couldn't even bring herself to think of how her parents would react to the news that their youngest daughter was to be an unmarried mother. "Sorry, Sarah, I didn't mean to upset you. I'm just trying to help, that's all. Do you want me to phone him?" Sarah laughed. "No, please don't. I don't know why you would think such a thing." Liz gave a little giggle. "At least you seem a little happier now." Sarah was a little happier that she'd shared some of her burden with another person. Liz was originally Kate's good childhood friend. Now that she was living with Kate's parents, she became good friends with Kate's younger sisters as well. Hard times had caused Liz to stay with the Millers, and her stay for just a few weeks had turned into something much, much longer. Liz's stay had also caused quite a bit of friction between Liz's parents and Sarah's parents. And now Liz's parents totally avoided Sarah's parents. Sarah had also heard that Liz's parents had caused Sarah's dad to be called to the bishop to have a meeting about having Liz at the house. Sarah never knew what happened at that meeting or what the bishop had decided on the matter. All she knew was that Liz was still at the house. It was obvious that the bishop was in agreement that Liz should stay with the Millers, at least for the time being. Sarah had assumed that the fact that Liz could be leaving any day, with her new job and everything, that the bishop was prepared to overlook Liz's parents' objections. It seemed Liz's parents thought that the best thing for Liz would be a shunning, to teach her a lesson, and shock her back into the community. Sarah was sure that nothing would ever bring Liz back to the community to live her life as an Amish person. Well, congratulations. Liz leaned forward and gave Sarah a hug. Thank you. This should be a happy time for me, shouldn't it? Sarah asked. Liz smiled and reached behind her head to tie her long, bleached blonde hair into a top knot. Lots of women in the English world bring up children by themselves. You can do it too. Sarah smiled, but on the inside she was not smiling. She didn't want to bring up a child by herself. She hadn't planned things this way. She wouldn't have planned to have a child out of wedlock and bring shame upon her family. Every time Sarah had thought of having her own children, she never once thought that she wouldn't be bringing them up within the community. She wanted to bring this child up with his or her father in the Amish community. After speaking with John about the English lifestyle, Sarah had thought that she might like to try it. But now that she was expecting a baby, she really wanted to stay within the safety of the community. How would that be possible now without a husband? Chapter 3. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. 1. John 1:9. Oh God, what have I got myself into? Please help me. Sarah had prayed forgiveness many, many times, yet she still didn't feel forgiven for compromising herself with a man before marriage. She had to believe she had been forgiven by God, as the scripture said, because she had confessed her sin to him. It will do no good to see the bishop, Sarah thought. Even if I confess my sin to him, I still can't stay in the community and bring shame to my family and cause gossip. I will have to leave eventually when I start getting bigger, but I will think about that later. I can't face to think about that now. Come here, give me another hug. Liz leaned forward and gave Sarah another hug. Don't look so worried, everything will work out just fine, Liz told her. Just then they heard a small knock on the door. Liz sprang off the bed and slowly opened the door and saw Jacob standing there. I heard you say Sarah is having a baby. Sarah covered her mouth in horror. Jacob was far too young to find out about these things. He had only just turned 11, and Sarah was sure he still didn't even know how babies were made. What would he think now with her having a baby and not having a husband? Sarah's situation had suddenly gone from very bad to much worse. Now her 11-year-old brother had to bear the burden of her sin. Sarah realized that this was another thing she would have to ask forgiveness for. She never thought that just one sin would not only affect her, but would have a far-reaching effect on many other people. Were you listening at the door? Liz spoke quietly so Sarah's parents would not be able to hear her. Jacob nodded. That is a sin, Jacob. You shouldn't listen in to other people's conversations. You will have to promise me you will not tell a living soul. Do you hear? For some reason, Jacob had always been frightened of Liz, and right now Sarah knew why. She spoke in a voice much like a wicked witch out of an English storybook. Even Sarah felt a little afraid of her at that moment. Not only did Sarah feel uncomfortable to hear Liz speak so harshly to her brother, she also felt uncomfortable with hearing her make him promise something. Sarah and her siblings had been taught by their parents that their word was their promise. I'll tell you what. As a reward for keeping your mouth closed, I'll reward you with this dinner right here. Liz picked Sarah's dinner plate full of breaded lamb and vegetables off the floor and handed it to Jacob. Even though Jacob had just eaten one dinner, he looked mighty pleased to be able to eat a second one. Jacob was a typical growing boy who could never get enough food. Wow, I won't tell anyone, the little boy said. Jacob carefully held the full plate of food. How did it happen? Now go to your room and eat it, and you'll not ask any more questions. Then I want you to go down and take the empty plate to the kitchen and tell your mom and dad that Sarah ate all her dinner and is feeling much, much better. All right? Jacob carefully took the plate from Liz. Yeah, Liz. Look me in the eye when you speak, Jacob. Liz's tone was still scary. Jacob looked Liz straight in the eyes. Yeah, Liz. Liz closed the door and slid down the back of the door to the floor and looked over at Sarah. They were both speechless at Jacob finding out about the baby at such an early stage before Sarah had even told her parents. Do you think he'll say anything? Liz asked. Sarah shook her head. He's a good boy. I've never known him to lie, and he did say he wouldn't say anything. You were pretty intimidating. You had me scared. Under normal circumstances, Sarah would have been concerned that Jacob had been asked to keep something from his parents, but these weren't normal circumstances. Yes, I have that effect on men, Liz said. The two girls managed to giggle even though they were both a little worried. I hope I haven't ruined his innocence. He probably doesn't even know how babies are made, and he should think that babies only come to a married man and woman, Sarah said. Nonsense. Don't give it another thought. It'll do him good. He can't be brought up sheltered. It's bad enough he's Amish. Liz realized she'd said something that may be offensive to Sarah. Oh, sorry, Sarah, but you know what I mean, don't you? I mean to say he'll have to know about that sort of thing eventually. Surely he's seen the farm animals doing it. Hush, Liz, that's an awful thing to say. Liz giggled. Come on, he's 11. He's not a baby anymore. You're just being oversensitive. The last thing Sarah needed right now was to be told she was being oversensitive. She was living in the Amish community, had done something terrible, and very soon she would be bringing shame on her whole family, and would have to leave the only home she'd ever known for an uncertain future and have a baby to care for as well. At times, Liz was just a little too much, and right now Sarah just wanted to be by herself. Liz patted Sarah on the arm. There are other options, Sarah. You don't have to keep it, you know. What are you suggesting? Adoption? Sarah looked horrified. Well, adoption is one option. You could go away for a while, have the baby, then come back to the community and no one would ever need know, Liz replied. Sarah pulled a blanket around her shoulders as a way of comforting herself from that terrible thought. I don't think I could give my baby up. Even if you have to be a single parent? Liz leaned away from Sarah a little. I'm not trying to give you advice or tell you what to do. I wouldn't even know what I'd do in your situation. I'm just saying you must consider every option. Sarah had to admit it was a way that she would be able to stay in the community and not bring shame to her family. Could she really let someone else raise her baby? Maybe the baby would be better off in a loving family with two parents instead of one, especially an Amish family. Sarah was sure she could never give her baby up, but on the other hand, she did want to do the best for the baby. I'll give it some thought, Liz. I don't think I could do it, though. In the back of Sarah's mind, she hoped that John would come back to her, and that they would be a family together, the two of them and the baby. The only problem with that was, although they had discussed having a life together, they had never spoken of children. What if he doesn't want to have any children? Not all English couples have children. Thank you for everything, Liz. Now I think I need to try to get some sleep. Liz leaned forward and kissed Sarah on the forehead. Everything will be all right, you'll see. After Liz left the room, Sarah took a sip of the hot lemon drink, which was supposed to cure all ills. Now it was lukewarm, almost cold. Sarah just wanted to close her eyes and go to sleep, but she knew the cold air whistling through the window would keep her awake and possibly give her a bad chill. She got out of bed and slowly walked toward the window to close it. As she did, she looked outside and noticed how the trees were encased in a glow that came from the gaslights from the sitting room downstairs. She stood quietly and watched the moonlight dance on the fields, and noticed how the wind swiftly blew some leaves lightly across the newly harvested fields. How she would miss the farm when she left. Sarah sat down on the seat underneath the window, rested her elbows on the windowsill, and cradled her chin in her knuckles, while she gazed at the barn and across the fields. This had been the only home she'd ever known. How could she possibly leave it? How is God going to fix up this mess I've got myself into? I'm about to bring a baby into the world with no dad and no marriage. I have to leave the Amish and live in the English world. What of my parents? I've inflicted this upon them as well. Sarah took a deep breath and tried to push her worrying thoughts from her mind. I just have to believe that God is going to work things out. I have to have faith and believe." Sarah looked out the window for a few more moments before she took her prayer cap off and changed into her nightgown. Once again, she lay on her bed and pulled the photo of John out from under her pillow. How she hoped that he still loved her. After she said goodnight to him and gave the photo a little kiss, she installed him back under her pillow and turned out the gas lamp next to her bed. Chapter 4. And Jesus said unto them, Because of your unbelief. For verily I say unto you, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, Remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. Matthew 17:19-21. The harder Sarah tried to sleep, the more it eluded her. She replayed the last phone conversation with John over in her head. He had arranged for her to call him at a certain time, specifically so they could make arrangements for them to meet. So why didn't he mention anything about them coming together again at all? He just talked about how busy he was all the time. It's as if I just rang a friend to have a chat and pass the time, she thought. Mentioning a baby was hardly appropriate given the tone of their conversation. Since Sarah had already gotten permission to go on Rumspringa from her dad, she had to tell him she was delaying it for a little while longer. Sarah. Sarah opened her eyes the next morning to see Annie, one of her older sisters, looking down at her. Go away. She pulled the covers over her head, hoping it wasn't time to wake up already. Mom let you sleep in because you were sick, but she said you should be getting up by now. She needs you to help with the chores if you're feeling better. Sarah mustered some energy, slowly pushed back the covers and sat up slowly and waited to feel sick. But nothing happened. She was tired, very tired, but today she didn't feel nauseous at all. You feel better? Annie asked. Could it be possible that this morning sickness has gone for good? Sarah hoped it had. Yeah, I do feel better. Annie picked a dress off the clothes peg and handed it to Sarah. Good, there's something I want to ask you. Sarah yawned and stretched out her arms over her head. What is it? Will you be an attendant at my wedding? Annie asked. Sarah tried to do the math quickly in her head. She was now roughly nearly 4 months, and with December only being next month, she would be nearly 5 months. She would be under closer scrutiny at a wedding and hoped the pregnancy wouldn't be showing by then. What if she had to leave the community before Annie's wedding? She said the only thing she could think to say. I would love to. Of course I will. Annie bounced toward the bedroom door. Good. I'm only having you as my attendant. Kate's making both our dresses. You know what I'm like at sewing, not very good. She said for us both to go there this afternoon for a fitting, if you're well enough. Sarah gave a nod, thinking that it would be far better to have the fitting when she wasn't showing. Then it occurred to her, what if she couldn't fit into the dress by the time the wedding came? The only thing for it was, she had to let Kate in on the secret. That way her older sister could make the dress a little bigger to accommodate her increasing size. Sarah had assumed that they were going to Kate's home for the fitting, but found out that they were going to the tailor's where Kate worked. We're both wearing blue, Annie said as the buggy pulled out from their house. Sarah's thoughts were far from the wedding. When? She asked. The wedding, of course. Annie momentarily took her eyes off the road to study her sister's face. What's wrong with you lately? You seem so distracted and distant. Sarah wished she could be more excited about Annie's wedding. A wedding is a very important occasion in someone's life. But all Sarah could think of was her own sorry situation. Okay, now I know there's something wrong. Is it John? Annie asked. Kind of. Sarah knew she'd have to tell Annie sooner or later, but wasn't quite sure if right now was the best time. Sarah, don't be so annoying. Are you going to make me guess? Sarah could see that her sister was getting agitated with her by the way she was glaring at her. I suppose you have to find out sooner or later. I'm going to have a baby. Sarah reluctantly studied her sister's face to gauge her reaction. Annie pulled the buggy off to the side of the road, and Sarah had a tense minute until Annie finally spoke. You're not, are you? Sarah nodded. I am. Annie's face turned beet red with fury. Is it John's? Sarah nodded. Annie pursed her lips together, shook her head and yelled. This never would have happened with an Amish man. I was worried something like this would happen. I hoped you'd be more sensible. What were you thinking, Sarah? How could you do that? Sarah remained silent. She'd already gone over everything in her head 1,000,000 times. Why did she keep seeing John when she found out he wasn't Amish? Why did she lie with him before marriage and go against God's laws and normal Amish behavior? Those and 100 other questions had gone through Sarah's mind for the past few months, and Sarah didn't want to go over those same questions with Annie. How could she even speak those things she felt when she was with John? How could she tell Annie that she was overcome with passion and felt that once she was in John's arms, nothing else in the world had mattered? Or that she only felt truly alive when she was with him? Jesse and I haven't even kissed. Do you know that? Kate and Benjamin never kissed either before they were married. Sarah felt horrible at the things Annie was saying. She knew they were true, though, but when she was with John, it was like he was the only important thing in the world. How could she tell Annie that now when it didn't even make sense to herself? Sarah fought back tears and wrapped the blanket that was on her knees up over her neck. She knew if just one tear escaped, then she wouldn't be able to stop crying. I can't speak about it, not if you're going to be angry. Annie was silent for a while before she said softly, "What are you going to do?" Sarah shrugged her shoulders in reply as she had no words to express all the thoughts swirling in her head. She had no idea what she would do and couldn't face thinking about it. Annie looked at her sister's belly. "When will he or she be coming? What's your due date?" "I'm not sure. I haven't seen a midwife or doctor or anything. I'd say about April or May, shortly after Kate's baby." "Annie, let's just keep going to Kate's shop. I don't want to spoil your wedding plans or your wedding or anything." "You haven't told Mom or Dad yet, have you?" Sarah shook her head as she cuddled the blanket. Annie headed the buggy to the tailor's shop where they were to have their dresses fitted for the wedding. "I'm sorry for getting upset, but I'm just finding it hard to believe, Sarah. It doesn't seem real." Sarah touched her swollen belly underneath the blanket. "It's very real," she thought. "I'll understand if you don't want me in the wedding. I will be a bit bigger by then and it might be noticeable. Of course I still want you at the wedding, but when are you going to tell people and what are you going to do?" "I don't know." Sarah was definitely not looking forward to telling her parents that she was having a baby. Sarah thought back to the day her older sister Kate announced that she and Benjamin were expecting. Their parents were overjoyed, but of course Kate and Benjamin were married, so of course news of a baby would be a good thing to the grandparents. Sarah knew she was not going to have the same delighted reaction, and in fact expected the opposite reaction from her parents. "The only people that know are you and Liz. Oh, and Jacob." Jacob? Sarah immediately regretted telling Annie that Jacob knew. That was another thing Annie would be angry about. "Yeah, he was listening in at the door last night when I was telling Liz. Liz made him say he wouldn't tell anyone." To Sarah's surprise, Annie didn't seem too angry about Jacob finding out. All she said was, "I wish he hadn't heard about it that way. I don't want anyone else to find out until I've figured out what to do. I'll have to tell Kate, though, because she'll have to make the dress bigger. Bigger than I am now, anyway. You should be able to hide it. You'll probably be the same size that Kate is now at the wedding," Annie said. "That's good. You can't tell she's any bigger at all. Now you have to help me tell her." "It's such bad timing with Annie's wedding in a few weeks and my baby coming so soon after Kate's," she thought. "Sorry, Annie. Sorry that you have to think of my problems when you should be enjoying your wedding plans." "No, Sarah, it's me that's sorry. I've just been thinking that maybe I should have let you go away with John like you'd planned if that's where your heart lay." Sarah pushed the blanket back over her knees and warmed her hands on the new gas heater installed in the dash. What would my life be like right now if I'd gone away with John just like we'd planned? Where would I be now if Annie hadn't talked me into going back home with her? No, it's best that it happened this way. If John has fallen out of love with me, then the love wouldn't have lasted. I don't want him to know about the baby. I want him to be with me because he loves me and not out of a sense of duty, she thought. Now let's think about your wedding. Sarah was quite nervous about telling her older sister Kate about her condition and hoped that Annie would help her break the news. Chapter 5. This is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. John 15:12. Sarah and Annie scurried to the tailor shop as fast as they could to avoid the cold air that was gushing down the street. Sarah never went to town much as she disliked the stares from Englishers that her Amish clothing drew. A wave of warm air engulfed them as they entered Rebecca's small tailor's shop. Along with the warmth was a definite smell of freshly cut and laundered fabric. Sarah was pleased to be standing in warmth after being in the buggy. Even with the gas heater in the buggy, the trip was too short for the heater to have time to warm the buggy up. Sarah looked up to see that a modern electric air conditioner was generating the warmth. Sarah considered that one good thing about living in the English world would be to have electricity for things such as lights and heaters, especially at this time of year. This was the first time that Sarah had been to Kate's work. The tailor's shop was quite small. While Kate and Annie talked, Sarah had a little wander around the shop. The walls were painted 2 different colors of purple, darker shade on the top part of the wall, and the lighter purple on the bottom half of the wall. Sarah had never seen purple walls before, or any colored walls other than pale colors such as cream or ivory or even pale blue, which was favored by the Amish. The floors were polished wood, which Sarah considered would make it easy to see if any needle or pins were dropped. A large bench loomed at the front door, which divided the workroom and the reception area. A large, well-used wooden table acted as a workbench where 4 sewing machines were installed. Sarah had never seen machines like these. They were large, and each one was a different shape. Sarah noticed 3 doors at the back of the room. She looked over at her 2 sisters to see them still talking, so she opened one of the doors. It appeared to be a changing room, most likely for people who need to try the new clothing on or have alterations, she thought. The next door she opened was exactly the same, another changing room. The 3rd door was slightly ajar. Sarah peered in through the door to see that it was a tiny kitchen, which was set up like a lunch or tea room. "What are you doing, Sarah? Come over here," Kate ordered. At that moment, Rebecca, Kate's boss, came through the front door. "Hello, you 2. And congratulations to you, Annie." Rebecca strode over and kissed both girls on the cheek. Sarah and Annie had already met Rebecca at Kate's wedding. Rebecca had what looked like a takeaway lunch in her hands. "I'll be out the back if you need me, Kate." "Thank you, Rebecca." Kate started taking Annie's measurements first as Sarah pushed her forward. Once Rebecca was out of earshot, Sarah took the opportunity to tell Kate her news, helped intermittently by Annie. Kate was noticeably shocked and quite angry with John. Sarah realized she was most likely angry with her too, but she was just shooting questions at her about John. Then Kate said the very thing Sarah didn't want to hear. "Have you thought about adoption?" Before Sarah could respond, Annie spoke on her behalf. "No, Sarah could never do that." Sarah looked at Annie, quite surprised at her response, since she'd never even discussed adoption with Annie, only with Liz. Why would Annie assume that she wouldn't adopt the baby out? Maybe she would if that was the best thing for the baby. Seeing that her question was not too popular, Kate added, "It's just that you aren't married. Maybe the baby would be better off with having 2 parents and a proper home." Adoption was something that Sarah had never even thought of until Liz had mentioned it. She could adopt the baby out to a good Amish family, but how would she know for sure and for certain that the baby would have a better life than being with her? "Maybe I haven't considered it up until now because I thought John might become my husband." "I'll consider it, Kate." Annie turned to look at Sarah with a look of horror across her face. "Give up your own baby?" "Annie, it's not that Sarah would want to give up her baby, but if the baby is better off in a family, then Sarah must consider that." Kate had always been the practical one. Annie just shook her head at Kate's suggestion. Kate straightened out her fabric tape measure in what looked like a nervous gesture. "You could go away somewhere, Sarah, and come back after you've had the baby and no one need know." She'd already heard nearly those exact same words from Liz, and now Sarah's legs went weak underneath her. She sat on the nearest chair and started crying. "See what you've done now, Kate?" Annie knelt down next to her sister and put her arm around her. "Don't worry, you won't have to give up your baby," Annie told her. Sarah choked back the tears. "I will have to do what's best for the baby." "And that might be to stay with its mother," Annie stated firmly while shooting a glare at Kate. "I didn't mean to upset you, Sarah. I just thought it might be an option. I'll get you a glass of water." Kate hurried out to the tea room. Sarah dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Kate returned and handed Sarah a glass of cold water. "Don't worry about things for now, Sarah. I'll make the dress a little larger everywhere so you'll look just slightly bigger all over. No one will notice a thing." "Thank you, Kate." Kate sat down next to Sarah. What did the father of the baby say? Annie, who was still crouched down next to Sarah, said, Kate, leave it alone. No more questions. Can't you see that you've already upset her? Sarah took a mouthful of the cool water. It's all right, she can ask questions, Annie. I haven't told him yet. Sarah added the word yet, as she didn't want to tell Kate that she would never tell him about the baby. No, that would mean another harsh lecture from her older sister, and she was far too emotional for that. I don't want to upset you anymore, but I must say this. If you decide to keep the baby, then the dad will have to help you out with money and things. Sarah nodded in agreement, just to keep Kate quiet for the moment. Now you two think about the wedding. We didn't come here to talk about me. While Annie and Kate fussed over which shade of blue to make the dresses in, all Sarah could think about was John. Kate had insisted that she should tell John that he would soon be a father, and he would have to contribute financially. But Sarah knew this was something she would have to do all by herself, somehow. I've already finished the organdy apron, see? Kate unfolded the white apron that Annie would wear over her blue wedding dress. Thank you, it's lovely, Kate, Annie said. Sarah worked hard to push John out of her mind and admired Kate's sewing skills. And this is Jessie's suit. I've nearly finished it except for the sleeves. Kate led Sarah and Annie over to view the suit, which was pinned to a tailor's mannequin. Lovely. Annie ran her hand over the black material. It feels so nice. Glad you like it, Kate said. Sarah touched the suit as well. You're so clever, Kate, being able to sew so well. You're a very good sewer too, Sarah. Come to think of it, that would be a good income for you. You'll need money when the baby comes. Sarah was pleased that Kate didn't mention adoption anymore and was speaking as if Sarah would keep her baby. Even though Sarah intended to consider adoption, she never thought that she would ever be able to go through with it. Sarah pulled her mind back to what Kate had just said about sewing and thought of her previous attempts at sewing. I might be all right at sewing, but I'm not as good as you, Kate. Nonsense, you are quite good and it's only practice. You'll improve quickly if you do a lot of it. Well, I guess I have to do something to get some money together. What do you suggest? For the first time, Sarah was feeling more confident. If she had a little money behind her, she would have more choices available to her. Rebecca had been in the back room the whole time and had overheard their whole conversation. She stepped into the shop. I'm sorry to eavesdrop, but Sarah, I do need someone to help for a few hours a week. It's just a small amount to start with, but it could develop into more hours if you're interested. Rebecca was quite an attractive older lady and wore plain clothes. Sarah guessed her to be in her early 50s. Yeah, I'd be very interested, thank you, but I'll need some practice first. The best way is feet first. You can learn on the job. Kate can show you what to do. Rebecca was a straightforward, no-nonsense sort of person, but the sort of person who was like a kindly old aunt. Sarah had to fight back the tears at Rebecca's kind offer. Thank you very much, Rebecca. That is so kind. I can start whenever you want me to. Sarah knew that the busier she was, then the less time she would have to think about John. Rebecca and Sarah agreed that she would start the very next day. Sarah was grateful that all the way home in the buggy, Annie didn't once mention her expectant condition or adoption, and instead talked about the wedding and the clothes that Kate was making. Chapter 6. For I have said, mercy shall be built up forever. Thy faithfulness shalt thou establish in the very heavens. Psalm 89:2. There's a letter for you, Sarah. When you finish reading it, can you come down and help with the dinner? Sarah's mother asked. All right, Mom. I won't be long. Sarah was grateful that her parents never asked her who was writing all the letters to her. They must have known it was John, the man she nearly had run away with, yet they never tried to stop her reading his letters. She had expected a lecture at the very least. Sarah went into her bedroom and closed her door. Once she hung her heavy black coat on the clothes peg, she flopped down on her bed and carefully opened the envelope. My dearest Sarah, I hope you are doing well. Sorry if I sounded a little strange when you called me on Tuesday. I had a lot on my mind. I'm very busy at the moment, and I think it's best that we delay you coming to see me. I still love you and want to be with you. It's just that there's a lot going on right now. When things have settled down a bit, I'll let you know. I miss you so much. I miss holding you and kissing you. I can't wait until you are back in my arms again. We will be together again soon. I love you. Love, John. After she'd read it a few times, Sarah carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope and hid it with John's other letters in the little drawer of her nightstand. She was very disappointed that the letter was a lot shorter than his other letters. He'd also given her no news of what he'd been doing at all. She was at least a little pleased that he did say that he still loved her, and they would be together soon. Still, it was hardly a letter that would encourage her to tell him of the baby. What possible reason would he have for putting our plans on hold? It just doesn't make sense unless he's lost interest in me and is trying not to upset me, or even trying to let me down gently. It was at that moment, when she had closed the little drawer, that Sarah realized she could not rely on John, and had to rely upon herself only. She had to make some plans for the future, and it was quite obvious that, for now at least, that those plans would not include John. She would have to write back to him, but not now. Right now she had dinner to help prepare. Even though she was upset over the contents of the letter, Sarah made up her mind not to show the disappointment on her face. Sarah entered the kitchen to hear her mom and Annie chattering away about what food they would cook for the wedding. The wedding was to be held right there at their house. Sarah's mom looked up at her. "You look much better today. So the flu's gone?" Annie raised her eyebrows and shot Sarah a look so her mother couldn't see. The look said, "When are you going to tell her?" "Yeah, totally gone. I feel fine." Sarah had a horrible feeling that her mom already knew. Her tummy was only just getting a little bigger. In the clothes she was wearing, there was no way anyone would be able to notice her increased size. She sucked in her tummy as much as she could anyway, just in case. As the smells of the cooking invaded the kitchen, Sarah was mighty pleased that the morning sickness had gone as suddenly as it had arrived. She was definitely not looking forward to telling her mom and dad of the baby, and thought it best to wait until after Annie's wedding to tell them. Besides, they would have hundreds of guests for the wedding, which meant a lot of work. So the last thing they needed on their minds was to learn of her problems. After dinner that night, once the scripture readings were over, Sarah told her parents she would be starting part-time work at the tailor shop where Kate worked. Her dad looked over the top of his glasses at her. "That's good, but will you still be able to help your mom with the chores?" he asked. "Of course. I'll only be doing a few hours a week, so I'll try not let it interfere with the chores." Sarah's mom looked a little pleased. "I'm sure Annie and I will manage." Her dad wasn't so pleased. "Annie will be gone soon and have her own house to manage," he replied. "It will all work out, Isaac." Sarah's mom had that tone in her voice which told her husband in a very nice way to hush and say no more. He quickly complied. Sarah went to bed that night pleased that she now had 2 jobs. She had the part-time job at the tailor's, and she would also sew quilts to sell, which was sort of like a job, she considered. It was clear to Sarah that if she made her own money, she would be able to rely totally on herself and not have to contact John. Contacting John was the last thing that she wanted to do right now. The next day, Annie took Sarah to the tailor shop in the buggy. It was Sarah's very first day at her very first job. "I'll show you how all the machines work in a minute, but first look at this." Kate took out a large parcel and unfolded a beautiful quilt. "I brought this quilt in to show you. I've just finished this one and I'm taking it in to sell today." Sarah studied the soft blue and green quilt and marveled at the detailed sewing in it. "Oh, that's so pretty. It looks just like the one that grandmother made." "Thank you. I make these at night and sell them on consignment at the craft shop just up the road. As soon as they get to the shop, they sell, usually on the very day they reach the shop. I make nearly $500 profit out of each one. The fabrics cost quite a bit and the shop takes a commission, but it still leaves me with good money," Kate told her. "Really? There's so much work in them, though. How long does it take you to make?" Sarah studied the fine hand stitching. "I do a few hours every night, and it takes me about 3 weeks to make one. I make 2 styles all the time because I can get quicker when I know where I'm going with it." Sarah nodded her head, trying to work out how much that was per week. Whatever it was, Sarah knew that every little bit of money counted, and she would do it for her baby. "Will you show me how?" "Of course, that's why I brought it in to show you. Mom showed us how to make these when we were younger. Do you remember how to do it at all?" Kate asked. "Yeah, I think so. I remember Mom used to have all the ladies around to the house for a quilting bee. I tried quilting a section once or twice, but it never looked like this. Mine was all puckered and crooked. It looked quite awful. Yours looks so well finished and lovely." Kate laughed. "Thank you. It's just practice. You'll sell as many as you can make. The tourists love them. Take your time with it, though. They can't be rushed, or you'll get yourself into all sorts of trouble. I can't get into any more trouble than I'm in now, Sarah thought, as she ran her fingers over the fine stitching and studied the detailed pattern. Thank you for the good idea. If you help me get the materials and pattern, I will start tonight. Sarah wasn't sure if she would be able to sew them as well as Kate did, but she knew she would have to try. Don't start tonight. I'll show you what to do if you come to my place on Saturday afternoon. If you start off the wrong way, it will be a disaster. Kate folded her quilt up and put it in a large fabric carrying bag. Rebecca has a lot of fabrics here. When it's the lunch break, you can go through and select some. I'll help you. The few hours' work went by very quickly. Rebecca had Sarah working on straight seams so she could get used to working the electric sewing machines, which had a very different action to the treadle sewing machine she used at home. Sarah was sure she remembered the basics about quilt making because her mom used to do so much of it before her eyesight started to fail. She was grateful for anything she could learn from Kate, as Kate's sewing was highly professional. The cutting of each piece of fabric is of vital importance. They need to be perfectly matched in size. That's the basis of the quilt. If you get that wrong, then the whole thing will be wrong. That Saturday afternoon, Sarah listened avidly to Kate's lessons on quilting. Then the pieces have to be put together with the utmost accuracy. If one small part is not aligned, it will throw the whole balance of the quilt out. Sarah couldn't help but cast her eyes around Kate's home when she should have been listening about quilt making. Hers was a real home, a perfect place to bring up children. How lucky Kate was to fall in love with a good man like Benjamin, who made her a lovely house. Okay, so what you're saying is you can't cut any corners and I have to pay attention to the detail of each piece all over the quilt. Exactly. Detail, 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 and it's best not to rush, especially with your first attempt. If you go too quickly, then it's easier to make mistakes, and it takes a lot more time to fix mistakes. Sarah had never been good when something required concentration or detail. She was the sort of person who would rush something just to get it finished. Got it. Slow and steady and attention to detail. Yeah, and you have to keep checking everything. Kate got down to the finer points of the sewing stitches, which Sarah realized was the easy part. The hard part would be the careful cutting out and all the preparation beforehand. Don't forget that cutting out is very important, and use Mom's good fabric scissors. Kate called out to Sarah as she was driving off in the buggy. Thank you, Kate. I won't forget. Chapter 7. A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another. As I have loved you, that ye also love one another. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. John 13:34-35. Annie and Jessie had both been baptized into the faith as soon as they decided to wed, and in doing so, they committed themselves to live by the unwritten tradition known as the Ordnung. The Ordnung are the rules and regulations and expected behaviors of the Amish lifestyle. The day of Annie's wedding had finally arrived. The 2 days preceding the wedding, Sarah, Annie, and their mother had done nothing but cook for the crowds who would be attending the wedding. There might be so many that they would have to eat in shifts. Hours before the ceremony, the wagon pulled up with the benches that were also used for the church services. The men would arrange them for the lunch once the ceremony was finished. Sarah was busy putting the finishing touches to all the roast chickens when she heard the rumbling of buggies that sounded like a thunderstorm. Sarah opened the window and leaned out to see dozens upon dozens of gray buggies headed for the house. There were so many more buggies than there were for the usual services that were held every second Sunday, where they broke off into smaller groups. Today, nearly the whole community turned up to the wedding. Sarah closed the window and focused her attention back to the food, glad that there would be a few more ladies to arrive who would be able to help. She was grateful that her morning sickness had left her, or there would have been no way she could have been around all this food and all these smells. There were so many roast-breaded stuffed chickens that she couldn't count them, buckets of hot mashed potatoes, coleslaw, and applesauce. The desserts were stacked in the utility room until after the main course was finished. There were all different sorts of pies, donuts, and puddings. There were also several wedding cakes. 4 wedding cakes were made by Sarah, 2 bought from the local bakers, and 6 made by Amish women who were friends of Sarah and Annie's mom. Sarah, there you are, her mother bustled into the kitchen. You go and get changed. I'll stay here. Kate had only finished sewing the dress 2 days before the wedding. Sarah had already tried it on and found that the blue dress fitted perfectly, and with the sheer white organdy apron over the top of the dress, nobody would ever be able to guess that she was expecting. Better still, being a cold day and the service held outside, she may even be able to wear her black coat most of the time. Sarah slipped the blue dress over her head, and as she tied the ties of the apron behind her, she stepped in front of the window. She looked down at the crowd of people. As she stood there, she pretended that it was her wedding, and that John was down there somewhere waiting to marry her. Chills ran all over her body as she felt pleasure in thinking what it would be like if John was Amish, and if they were getting married in front of all their friends. Her thoughts made her happy, even if they were for a fleeting moment. Well, that is never going to happen. I will never have an Amish wedding, and no good Amish man will ever want me now. Sarah pulled her mind back to reality as she replaced her prayer cap back on her head. Hundreds of people were gathered, and Annie and Jessie were standing nervously before the bishop. Sarah, being an attendant, was standing next to Annie. The bishop began a short talk. Usually the talks before a wedding were quite brief, but this one seemed quite long. As the bishop spoke on the sanctity of marriage and how important that commitment was, it struck Sarah once more that she would never be able to have a wedding like the weddings her two sisters had. Annie's beautiful wedding to Jessie had just become another reminder to Sarah of the terrible mistake she'd made. She had always assumed that she would marry a hard-working, good Amish man, and they would be happy and have a large family together. She'd always assumed that her children would be able to play with her siblings' children just as she'd played with her own cousins growing up. Now that would never happen. Of course, she wanted a baby, but not like this. Not before she was married, and certainly not to an Englisher. She had reprimanded herself over her actions countless times, and yes, she knew a man and woman should only come together under the sanctity of marriage. But she couldn't undo what she'd already done. All she could do was confess her sins to God, which she had already done many times. She knew she should confess to the bishop as well, but it was much easier just to leave the community and save her family from shame and gossip. Once the bishop was finished his talk, Annie and Jessie publicly stated their commitment to one another, and the bishop pronounced them married before God. With the ceremony over, the guests sang some hymns. Praise be God in the highest throne, who has chosen us, has put a beautiful garment on us, that we would be newborn. This is the proper wedding garment, with which God adorns his people. The wedding of the Lamb is already prepared, for the righteous to lead the way to rejoice, all loving Christians, that God has received you, and prepared a beautiful banquet room for you, in which we shall all come. Sarah sat at the main table at Annie's side as she was an attendant. Other ladies were helping to serve the food that Sarah, Annie, and their mom had spent, seemingly days to prepare. Once the first sitting of the food was finished, Sarah went for a wander to walk off all the food she'd eaten so her tummy might settle a little. "Sarah," a deep voice called. Sarah turned to see Ephraim striding toward her with a huge smile on his face. Ephraim was John's cousin, and she hoped that he would mention John. John had stayed with Ephraim for months to try the Amish lifestyle, and that's why when she first met John, she didn't know he wasn't Amish. "Hello, Ephraim." Ephraim put his head to one side and casually placed his hands on his hips. "I hear you're sweet on my cousin, John." Sarah couldn't respond to his question. She could tell by the mocking tone in his voice that he was not supportive of their relationship. Ephraim was a very handsome man, but Sarah considered the inside of Ephraim did not match how he appeared on the outside. Sarah wondered if vanity might have crept into his life. Is he arrogant because he knows he is so handsome? Sarah considered his looks to be quite similar to John, although her John was beautiful on the inside even if he wasn't Amish. John had been born Amish, so Sarah thought that maybe that had something to do with his goodness. "All right, don't speak," he said. "But I know you were set to run away with him. Best that you know that he's engaged to someone else, an Englisher," he told her. Ephraim studied Sarah's face, obviously hoping for a reaction. "No, that's not so." Sarah blurted her words without thinking. Seeing the look on Ephraim's face, she wished she hadn't given him the satisfaction of seeing her upset. Ephraim laughed as he replied, "John is smart, handsome, and quite wealthy. Why would he want a plain woman when he could have any English woman he wants? He's a lot to give up, you know." Sarah searched Ephraim's face for a hint that he might be telling a fib. "Think about this, then. He's English. Why would he want to tie himself to an Amish woman? Sarah wanted to say for love. It was clear from the way Ephraim spoke that he didn't even understand the concept of love. He was also speaking as if he himself found nothing appealing about an Amish woman. Sarah noticed over Ephraim's shoulder that Liz was approaching them. Sarah was glad that their conversation would be shortly interrupted. Liz was wearing Amish clothing for the wedding that she had borrowed from Kate. Sarah couldn't stop staring at her because she looked so very different. Gone were the tight English clothing, and the huge volume of bouncing blonde hair, and in its place was a modest pale yellow dress and white apron. Her blonde locks were covered by a white prayer cap. She still had her long nails, but they were devoid of bright polish. Instead of her usual heavily made-up face, she only had a dash of lip gloss. "Ephraim, come here," Liz spoke in her usual firm tone, while adjusting her bleached blonde hair under her prayer cap. Sarah was surprised to see Ephraim turn and obey Liz's direction without saying anything further to Sarah. Ephraim's absence gave Sarah time to reflect on the news he had just hit her with. Could John really be engaged? Then why did he want me to go back to Ohio with him? Maybe he has just recently become engaged, and that explains why he doesn't want me to come there anymore. At least I know now what's keeping him so busy. Sarah wanted to cry, and if it hadn't been for her baby, she probably would have. She made the decision that she would not cry, she would be strong for her baby. After the evening hymns were over, the crowd of people had lessened, and Sarah busied herself cleaning up the leftover food and the dishes. Sarah looked around to see if Liz could help her, as a lot of the ladies who were previously helping had gone home. Sarah saw Liz by the barn talking to Ephraim. She studied their movements and gestures. They looked very much like they were a courting couple. She was giggling at the things he was saying, and Ephraim had his arm up leaning against the barn and his body was facing Liz's. They looked like a very attractive couple together. Sarah didn't think much of Ephraim's character after what he said to hurt her regarding John, and also the hurtful things he said about Amish women, even though he was Amish himself. It wasn't just that he'd told her that the man she was in love with was engaged, it was the fact that he had thoroughly enjoyed telling her the news. Oh well, if anyone can handle Ephraim Zook, it's Liz, she thought. Sarah decided to let Liz have her little flirtation and didn't call her over to help. Chapter 8. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear, because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. 1. John 4:18. It was very late when Sarah had finally retired for the night. She changed into her cotton nightgown and sank between the cool, freshly washed sheets. Her hand went to her belly as it did several times during the day. However, during the day she had to be careful that no one saw her hand naturally travel to her belly, as that was a familiar pose of expectant mothers. It felt comforting for Sarah to have her hand over her baby whom she loved so much, even before he or she was born. "We will be okay," she said aloud to her baby. Sarah pulled out the photograph of John underneath her pillow and studied his face. If it's meant to be, then God will make a way. There is nothing I can do about it now. It's all been taken out of my hands. Dear God, I hand my baby and myself over to you. Please look after us. Amen. With that prayer, Sarah pushed the photo into one of his letters in the nightstand drawer and closed it, deciding not to look at his photo so much. Sarah was not pleased to find out on her sister's wedding day that the man she loved, the father of her baby, was engaged to another woman. She wanted to phone John and ask him if it were true. Was he really engaged to an English girl? However, rejection was something she could not handle right now. She would not phone him or answer any more of his letters. Weeks had gone by since she'd last phoned him, and his letters kept coming. Why would he keep writing to me if he's engaged to another? Sarah hadn't replied to any of John's letters since she had called him on the phone. Now she was pleased with that decision. As was usual at many Amish weddings, Annie and Jessie had stayed the night at Annie and Sarah's parents' house as they had helped clean up until very late. Annie offered to drive Sarah to work that day, rather than Sarah drive the buggy herself. "I'll hitch the buggy myself, and you make sure I'm doing it all correctly. Then sit beside me while I drive?" Annie was the one in the family that drove the buggy, and now Sarah thought at times she learned. "Yeah, all right then." Annie knew her sister would have to learn to do a lot of things herself now that she would be living at Jessie's house. Even though Jessie lived on the farm next door, it was still a fair distance away. Sarah really enjoyed the few hours she worked at the tailor's, as it gave her something other than herself to think about. When Rebecca left the tailor's shop that morning to run some errands, Sarah thought it the perfect time to have a private talk with her sister, Kate. Kate. Kate looked across the work table at her sister. Yeah? Sarah was nervous about what she had to say to Kate, but she had to tell someone. At the wedding, Ephraim told me that John was engaged to an Englisher. Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry to hear that. I didn't realize you still had hopes that you two would ever be a proper couple and get married. Kate's words were like a heavy blow straight to Sarah's heart. Was it so unbelievable that she might marry John? Why would Kate think that there was no chance for the two of them? She was sure she hadn't said anything to make Kate think that. Kate looked at Sarah's face. Well, he is English, Sarah. Even though he was born Amish, he was brought up from a young age in the English world. You told me he tried out the Amish world by living with his cousin Ephraim for a few months. He obviously didn't like it, did he? Sarah bit her lip. It was true he didn't like the Amish world at all, and even told Sarah that she was living in a time warp. But I was willing to go with him and live as an Englisher. We had plans. I was going to get my GED and everything. Sarah's voice trailed off. What use was it trying to convince Kate that what they had was true love? Even she was having doubts that John's affections towards her were real love. I just feel terrible, Kate. The tears started to roll down Sarah's face. Kate rushed to put her arms around her sister. Everything will be all right. You'll see. Pray to God and He will sort it all out for you. Between sobs, Sarah said, I have prayed, Kate. You have to believe when you pray. God says in the Gospel of Mark, what things soever ye desire when ye pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them. Sarah nodded. She wanted to believe that everything would work out well for her, even though she couldn't possibly see how they would. Everything looked so bleak. She would have to start a whole new life for herself without her family and without John. It sounded so easy just to believe that you can have whatever you ask for. I just feel I've been so bad. How can I ask God for something and expect Him to work things out when I got myself into this situation in the first place? Sarah, all people sin. God forgives our sins if we confess them. There is not one sin that is worse than another sin. You have asked forgiveness, haven't you? Sarah wiped the tears off her face with the back of her hand. Yeah. You've been forgiven. That's what the Bible says. Kate handed Sarah a handkerchief. Sarah dabbed at her eyes. Okay, thank you. I feel a little better. The bell of the front door, which warned them of a customer's entrance, interrupted the girls. Sarah looked up to see a tall, older Amish man, then put her head down, as she didn't want to talk to anyone Amish for fear of gossip. Kate talked to the man who was looking for Rebecca. After he left the shop, Sarah asked, Who's that? That's Jeremiah. Not sure of his last name, but he comes here a bit. He's sweet on Rebecca. The girls giggled. I'll put a pot of coffee on for us. Kate headed to the back tea room. No coffee for me, please. Sarah used to love coffee, but she'd lost her fondness for it ever since the morning sickness had started. Her taste for everything else had returned except for the coffee. Lemon tea? Yeah. I'll make some. Sarah could hear Kate rattling around while she was making the tea and called out to her. Does Rebecca like him too? I think so. He seems very nice. Kate brought 2 steaming mugs out and set one in front of Sarah. Get any tea on the fabric and Rebecca will most likely kill you. Tea and coffee stain really badly on fabric, Kate told her. Sarah laughed. I'll be very careful. So tell me about Rebecca and Jeremiah. Nothing to tell, really. He just started coming in here a while ago with odd sewing jobs. He's a widower and comes in to talk to her quite a bit. That's all I know. Kate took a sip of her hot drink. She lights up, though, after his visits. Sarah smiled at the thought of love and how it could light up a person from the inside and make them feel alive. That's how she had felt with John. She felt alive when she was with him, almost as if she was not really living when she was apart from him. Sarah sighed. At least she'd known love in her life. She had to be grateful for that at least. Chapter 9. And that ye study to be quiet and to do your own business, and to work with your own hands as we commanded you, that ye may walk honestly toward them that are without, and that ye may have lack of nothing. 1 Thessalonians 4:11-12. Sarah arrived home ready to tackle her new quilting venture. She had a bundle of fabric already waiting up in her room, and all the instructions from Kate were firmly in her head. She decided to start that very night after the family Bible readings. As Sarah approached the front door, the familiar smell of her mother's fresh-baked bread distracted her from her thoughts of quilting and suddenly reminded her of how hungry she was. Sarah had gone from hardly being able to eat anything at all to being quite ravenous most of the time. The feeling that she used to have at the end of every meal had now changed, and she never seemed to have that feeling of fullness. She tried to curb her appetite as she feared getting too big too soon, which would jeopardize her secret. "There's another one of those letters for you," her mom said as she opened the door. Sarah knew, the way her mother emphasized the word "those," that she knew the letter was from John. Her parents knew John as the Englisher she'd nearly run away with. "Thank you, Mom." Sarah, unable to stop herself, went to the kitchen and cut herself a slice of bread and ate it quickly before taking the letter off the kitchen table to read in her room. The letter was a disappointment, as was every letter since she had phoned him weeks ago. There was no news of his studies, no news of the job he was to begin, and certainly no news of his engagement to someone else. In fact, there was nothing about his life at all. Yet his letters were still full of his love for her and promises that they would be together. Sarah carefully folded the letter and put it with the others in the top drawer of her nightstand. There was no use even reading the letters from him anymore, as they were all the same. She decided that she would just keep the letters from him in a bundle and never reply to any of them. There was clearly no point. She would put John right out of her mind and just think about herself and the baby. After dinner, Sarah had carefully cut out pieces of fabric scattered all over her bedroom floor. The only way she could accurately cut out the pieces was to sit on the floor and cut them out with her mom's large scissors. She could have used the large table in the kitchen where the family ate. Only Sarah thought it best to keep out of her parents' way as much as possible. As she carefully measured and drew a line where she would cut, she was sure she could feel the baby move inside her. It was like little tiny flicks or flutters, which Sarah thought was like butterfly wings. Was she imagining it? Is this what babies feel like when they move? Sarah lay down on the bed so she could concentrate on what she was feeling. As soon as Sarah lay down, she had to fight the urge to sleep. She had been so tired lately. She waited for a while and nothing happened. After a few more moments of lying perfectly still, Sarah felt the movements again. "That's my baby moving." Sarah was so excited that she just had to tell someone. But who? Naturally, the first person she wanted to tell was John, but of course that was out of the question since she wasn't talking to him at all, and he didn't even know about the baby. Her parents didn't know, so she couldn't tell them. Annie was out with Jessie as she was most evenings, so that left Liz. "Yeah, I have to tell Liz that I just felt my baby move." Sarah intended to go straight to Liz's bedroom to share the news. But it was just so comfortable on the bed, and she was so very tired. She thought she would just lie there for just a few more moments. She was drifting off to sleep when Liz just happened to knock on her door. "Can I come in, Sarah?" Liz asked. Sarah jolted herself to an upright position. "Yeah, of course." Liz closed the door behind her. "Asleep so soon?" "No, I didn't want to be. I've got so much to do tonight. I'm glad you've come and got me out of bed." Sarah got off the bed and knelt down on the floor to finish cutting out while she talked to Liz. "There's not much room, sorry. You can sit on the bed and talk to me if you like." Sarah looked at Liz's slim figure and felt a little envy. She knew she would get a lot larger than she was right now, and she was already feeling quite chunky. Sarah picked up the scissors and started following the lines she had traced for cutting. If she were going to get this done, she would have to talk and cut at the same time. Liz stepped over the carefully cut out pieces of fabric and lay down on Sarah's bed, tummy first. "Quilting, I see." Sarah glanced up at Liz and wished she could lie on her tummy like that as well. "Yeah, I need all the money I can get for the baby." "Nice colors," Liz said. "Thank you. I have to tell you something, Liz. I'm so excited. I just felt the baby move." "Oh, Sarah, that's just sensational. What did it feel like?" Sarah put her hand against her tummy. "It feels very strange to have something moving inside. It feels like something soft and gentle, like butterfly wings." "That's so nice. That also leads me to why I've come to talk to you," Liz said. "Yeah?" Sarah realized at that moment that Liz wasn't just there for small talk. Nevertheless, she returned her attention to the cutting out in front of her. I've made an appointment for you at my doctor for tomorrow afternoon." "What?" Sarah almost squealed in shock and dropped the large metal scissors from her hands. As usual, when things looked like they weren't going to go her way, the tone in Liz's voice turned rather stern. "You haven't seen anyone yet, have you?" Sarah realized that time was getting away, and if she had already felt the baby move, then maybe she should go and see someone to check that all was going okay. She never had the need to go to a doctor before in her whole life. "No, but I wasn't going to have a doctor. I'm going to use a midwife. Thank you anyway." "Think about it, Sarah. Ephraim's mother is the midwife who everyone in the community uses. Do you want things to get back to John? Can you use her anyway if you've left the community by then?" Liz was silent for a while, waiting for Sarah to answer her questions. "Have you thought about any of these things, Sarah?" Sarah knew she was having trouble facing the fact that time was marching on. She was already 5 months into her pregnancy, and she wouldn't be able to stay in the community or use a midwife from the community for that matter. Liz's high-pitched voice was starting to irritate her, but she was thankful for her concern and knew that she had her best interests at heart. "Thank you, Liz. What time did you make the appointment for?" "I know you work in the mornings, so I made it after I finish work too so that I can come with you. Is 4:30 okay?" "Yeah, thank you so much, Liz. My head's in such a muddle." "I know, you're hopeless." Liz spoke in a kindly and affectionate tone, even if her words were harsh. Sarah deliberately turned the attention away from herself and asked Liz a few questions of her own. "I saw you and Ephraim looking pretty cozy at the wedding." Liz looked a little embarrassed, and her face flushed a shade of bright crimson. "I've liked him for a while now." "Really? He seems to like you as well." Sarah thought them a most unlikely couple. Then again, Sarah could not see Liz with any Amish man at all. The thought of Liz with an Amish man was just too ridiculous. Liz wore makeup all the time, and she had bleached her already fair hair into a lighter shade of platinum blonde. Her nails were usually long and brightly colored. Sometimes she even wore little patterns on her fingernails. It wasn't only her hair and makeup, it was her clothes, which were very much English and tightly fitted. She did help with the chores, but only when she was wearing big, thick gloves so she wouldn't ruin her nails. No, I can't see her living an Amish lifestyle at all. The thought at least put a smile on Sarah's face. Liz nodded regarding Sarah, thinking Ephraim liked her, but of course she would be used to most men liking her. Chapter 10. "Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness." Isaiah 41:10. The appointment at the doctor was quite quick. He took Sarah's blood pressure, took a blood test, and set up an appointment for her to have an ultrasound. As they were leaving the doctor's office, Sarah turned to Liz. "Thank you for coming with me. I'm not too sure about having an ultrasound." "Nonsense. Everyone has one. It's perfectly safe." Liz linked her arm through Sarah's as they walked back to Liz's car. "Have you heard any more from John?" Sarah's heart beat a little faster at the mention of John's name. "Yeah, most days I get a letter from him. I've stopped reading them, though." Liz just nodded her head as if she understood Sarah's reasoning. Sarah was quite surprised, as she had expected a lecture from her. "Ephraim told me that John's engaged to someone else." The words hurt her even as she said them, but she wondered if Liz had heard any more information from Ephraim. Liz slowly nodded her head. "I didn't know if you knew. Ephraim told me that too." Sarah looked down at the ground as they walked. "Engaged is not married, though. There's still a chance." Sarah shook her head and said, "I'm not going to go chase after him, Liz. If he prefers someone else, then I'm not going to stand in his way." Sarah's baby was due in 3 months. Sarah could not physically conceal her secret any longer and decided that she had to tell her parents that night. After the nightly Bible reading would be the perfect timing, she thought. All through dinner, she felt sick at the thought of having to tell her parents. She knew they would be extremely upset and disappointed in her, and worse, she knew she would have to leave the house. Liz wouldn't be home until later that night, and there was only Jacob and her parents at dinner. As usual, Jacob was sent up to bed at his 8 o'clock bedtime after the readings. As Sarah was sitting down with her parents, she knew this was the perfect time to reveal her secret. She had rehearsed what she would say so many times. yet all of those words had gone out of her mind completely. Sarah knew both her parents were going to be hugely disappointed in her. Her two older sisters had set a wonderful example of how an Amish woman should behave, and Sarah had felt like she behaved the opposite to her sisters. She had let her family down in so many ways. Sarah had rehearsed this in her mind so many times that it was now making her physically ill whenever she thought of telling them. Now it had come to the point where she just wanted to tell them and get it over with, so she wouldn't have to have the trauma of continually thinking about telling them. She had asked advice from her two sisters on how to break the news to them, and they were of no help whatsoever. All Sarah knew was that they would both be shocked. Sarah had always been such a good girl and had given them no trouble. That is, until she had met John. Sarah took a deep breath and decided the best way would be to just plunge in feet first and say the first thing that came into her head. "Mom, Dad, there's something I have to tell you both." Her dad put the large black Bible that was balanced on his knees on the side table next to him. Her mom looked up at her from reading the budget. Neither of them said a word. Sarah felt the weight of both sets of eyes upon her. Sarah knew that this would not go well. "What I have to tell you is not good." She looked from one parent to the other, and still neither said a word, and their faces were without expression. She closed her eyes for a moment, then said, "I'm having a baby." After a moment of silence, her mom nodded her head. "Yeah, we know." Her mom looked nervously at her husband and then added, "We were wondering how long you would wait to tell us." Sarah could not believe that they already knew. "How did you know?" "I knew from the time you couldn't be near the meat cooking. You also don't drink coffee anymore. When I was expecting you, I could never drink coffee." Sarah's dad still hadn't said a word, but Sarah could sense his stern disapproval and disappointment hung heavily in the air. Her mom started talking nervously, and it seemed to Sarah her mom was afraid of what her dad might say. "Then you started getting bigger. We're old, but we aren't stupid." Sarah fought back tears. She deserved whatever would happen to her. She deserved it for being so stupid to make the mistake that she made. Her dad eventually spoke. "Is the father of the baby the one you nearly ran away with, that John man?" "Whatever does my dad think of me now? I've lost his respect. For him to ask that question sounds like he thinks I may have been with more than one man. Yeah, I've made a mess of my life. He's not going to be a part of my baby's life." "Yeah, you made a big mistake, but everyone makes mistakes. Have you confessed your sin and asked for God's forgiveness?" her father asked. "Yeah, I have." "Well, God has forgiven you and will no longer hold the sin against you. You must go and speak to the bishop as well, and he will decide what you must do," he told her. "No, I can't speak to the bishop, Dad. I just can't. I have to leave home and find somewhere to live." Sarah could not go through with seeing the bishop. If she wanted to stay in the community, she knew there would be a big meeting with the bishop and the elders of the church, and they would decide what to do with her. If they let her stay, she would have to make a public confession before the whole community. Even if she did just that, it would not stop shame coming upon her family. She could not see that they would let her stay. There were no unwed mothers in the community at all. That sort of thing never happens in the Amish community. "You can stay here," her mom said. "No, I can't stay and bring shame upon you. Think of all the gossip and all the talk. No, I will not stay. You would get shunned for having me stay. I never intended that I would stay beyond the time when I could no longer hide it." After a time, her dad spoke. "That is why we stay separate from the outside world, so things like this cannot happen. The English are not like us," he said. How could Sarah even begin to explain to her parents that she thought John was Amish at the start? Even though she found out he was English that very same day, by then it was too late. She'd already fallen in love. That was something they would never understand. "No, thank you, I must go." Sarah could not face having to speak to the bishop. Nor could she stay and risk having her parents shunned. "Thank you for not being upset with me." "We are both very upset about it, Sarah, but what's done is done. Go wash your face and get ready for bed," Mom said. Sarah's dad cleared his throat and said, "This would have never happened with an Amish man. That is all I will say on the matter." Sarah kissed them both on the cheek and headed to her bedroom. It had gone better than she had thought. She expected them to yell at her or lecture her, or some sort of reprimand or her mom to cry. Yet none of those things happened. Sarah noticed how her parents balanced each other perfectly. It had been clear to Sarah that her dad had been furious about her condition. She was sure her mother had been a calming influence on him and comforted him about the situation, and even made him look at it in a different way. Sarah thought that they had the ideal marriage. It was clear they both really loved each other, and they totally supported each other in everything. It was obvious that they had known about her condition for some time and had discussed it at length. Maybe one day I may have a relationship like that. But having a baby out of wedlock will make finding a good man a lot more difficult. Chapter 11. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report. If there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. Philippians 4:8. Sarah dreaded going to bed because it was when she was lying in bed that she had time to think about John. During the day, her work at the tailor's shop and chores filled her mind, while at night she had quilting to think about. But when she turned her lamp off at night, John's face was always before her. Nothing at night could switch off her thoughts of John. Even though she hadn't replied to the last of his letters, they had arrived just as frequently. Even though she didn't want to read them, she kept all his unread letters in a bundle under her mattress, as she couldn't bring herself to throw them away. Why did I fall in love with an Englisher? She wondered if she should phone him and hear it from him directly that he was betrothed to someone else, or engaged as the English say. I could phone him and give him a chance to explain himself for the sake of the baby. No, I will not. Sarah spoke out aloud and rather frightened herself. He deserves no chances. We had plans, real plans, and he's just tossed me aside for another girl. Let him have his exciting life with this other girl. I certainly won't be calling him ever again. Having no phone on the property, the only way they could speak was for Sarah to phone him, which she had done in the past from the phone in Jesse's barn. He will stop writing sooner or later, she thought. At work, Sarah had graduated from straight seams to doing hems on the overlocking machine. Kate, I told Mom and Dad. Kate looked up from the beaded English gown she was hand-stitching diamantes onto. How did they take it? Sarah had just started sewing a hem, so she waited before she finished it before she spoke. Much better than I expected. They even said I could stay there at the house, she told Kate. The bishop would never allow that, Sarah. They'd be shunned, Kate replied. I know they will. I know I can't stay there, but I have decided to keep the baby. Yeah, I thought you would. I suppose if you made a public confession, you would be allowed to stay at the house. No, I couldn't live through the shame and think of the shame for Mom and Dad. An unwed mother was just unthinkable amongst the Amish. I can't do that. No, I couldn't. Kate straightened in her chair and picked up another diamante to attach to the gown. I wouldn't either if I were in your situation. Yeah, but you'd never be silly enough to be in my situation, Sarah thought. Sarah noticed that Kate was so cold that she had a small electric heater blowing on her feet. It was then that Sarah realized she had hardly felt the cold at all in the last few weeks, as the baby had become like a little heater, warming her up. Kate, why are you so cold? I thought pregnancy stopped you being so cold. You're not that much further along than me. I'm always cold, especially my feet. I didn't have a scrap of morning sickness either. And you did, didn't you? Kate replied. Yeah, that's true. I guess everyone is different. A customer who brought in some clothes that needed adjusting interrupted them. Kate showed the customer to the change room and pinned and marked the dresses ready for sewing. Once the customer left, Sarah asked, Can you help me find somewhere to live, Kate? Kate sat back down at the work table across from Sarah. Why don't you live in Rebecca's apartment where I used to live above the shop here? It's only small, but I really loved living in it. Sarah thought that the location would be so convenient being in the center of town with all the shops close by. She wouldn't have any transport, so being so close to everything would be perfect. Could I? I don't see why not. Rebecca hasn't let it out yet. I'll ask her when she comes back. Rebecca had left the shop to run some errands, and when she came back she was delighted that Sarah was interested in the apartment. Come up and see it right now. See if it suits you, Rebecca said. Sarah knew it would suit her before she saw it. Rebecca unlocked the door of the internal stairway, and Sarah followed close behind her. I haven't let it out yet because it needs some little things done, like a new coat of paint. Sarah looked around the room. It was just one room, but very large. Much like her bedroom at home, it was plain and sparsely furnished. In the corner was a small kitchen sink with cupboards and a microwave oven. In front of the kitchen sink was an old wooden dining table and 4 chairs. The floorboards were wide and highly polished. A large bed was flanked by 2 nightstands, and there was a large chest of drawers against the side wall. Sarah walked over to one of the 2 windows in the apartment and looked down at the street below and briefly watched all the people walking about below. The apartment smelled a bit stuffy, but Sarah knew that was only because it had been locked up for some time. This will be wonderful, Rebecca. How much will it be? Stay for nothing, Sarah. The electricity is combined with the shop below, so just make a contribution to the monthly electricity. Sarah was amazed at Rebecca's generosity, and she could see why Kate felt like she was a second mother to her. No, I couldn't do that. I must pay properly. Rebecca looked into Sarah's eyes and rubbed the side of her arm. Would you deprive me from helping you? Sarah just raised her eyebrows. She'd only known this type of kindness from the Amish, yet Rebecca was English even though she had grown up Amish. Sarah remembered Kate telling her that Rebecca's English husband had died around 5 or 6 years ago. Rebecca had left the Amish to marry Colin when she was quite young. Thank you, Rebecca. You can pick the new color for the walls if you like. Rebecca picked up the paint chart that was on the kitchen table and pointed to a color. I was thinking of this color. The color Rebecca pointed to was a pale yellow, almost cream color. Sarah took the paint chart that was being handed to her. That looks a nice color. The walls were currently a dull gray, and Sarah thought that the pale yellow would really brighten the apartment up, as it had a warm-looking hue rather than the starkness of the gray. I had the painters booked in for next month, but I'll see if they can move it forward to tomorrow. If not, I'll get someone else to do it. I'm guessing you're in kind of a hurry? Yeah, kind of. Sarah patted her tummy. It doesn't even need to be painted, Rebecca. It's fine as it is. No, see there and there? Rebecca pointed out to Sarah all the areas where the paint was chipped or scratched. It hasn't been painted for years, and I like to try to keep it in good condition. Sarah took one better look around the apartment. She could really see herself living there and was starting to look forward to it. Finally, things were starting to work out for her. This was the first time in quite a while she felt that something was going her way. Thank you so much. I can't wait. Rebecca opened and closed the window that overlooked the street to see that it opened and closed easily. You can move in on Saturday if you don't mind the smell of the fresh paint. I'm sure I'll be all right with it. When they both came back downstairs, Sarah told Kate she would be moving into the flat. I'll have Benjamin help you move your things, Kate said. Sarah was at last pleased that she had faced up to telling all her family about the baby, and now she had a place to live. That was 2 huge milestones out of the way. However, the fact that she would have to leave the Amish weighed heavily upon her. Being Amish was all that Sarah knew, and being Amish was who she was. Yet through her mistake, Sarah would almost certainly never be able to live in the community ever again. That was something that Sarah had to get used to. Chapter 12. And Jesus answering saith unto them, Have faith in God. Mark 11:22. The bishop had finally suggested to Sarah's dad that it would be best if Liz found another place to stay. Sarah had often wondered why her mom and dad let Liz stay for so long, considering the flamboyant English-style clothing she wore, which some might consider almost provocative at times. That night she heard her mom and dad talking on the easy chairs while she was washing up. She's a good girl and just needs a little time to sort herself out, her father said. Then she heard her mother respond. Yeah, well, she was brought up well. She will return to the Amish, you will see, he said. I don't doubt it, Isaac, I don't doubt it, but we must obey what the bishop says. We've provided a place for her to stay, and that is all we can do. Now it is up to God. From the accidentally overheard conversation, Sarah found out that her mom and dad expected that Liz would return to the Amish someday. That was something that Sarah seriously doubted. Liz had been a bit sad to leave, but she found an apartment fairly quickly, which wasn't far from Sarah's new apartment. The phone in the tailor's shop rang and Kate answered it. Sarah, it's Liz on the phone. Hello, Liz. I'm picking you up in half an hour for the ultrasound. You didn't forget, did you? No, of course not. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the ultrasound and was quite nervous about having an image taken of the baby. I won't park the car. I'll just pull up out front and you come out when you see me, okay? Sarah found it quite convenient to have a friend with a car as there was nowhere to park a buggy near the ultrasound clinic. While she was staying with Sarah's family, Liz had to park her car behind the barn. Liz picked Sarah up on her hour lunch break, and only having part-time work Sarah had finished for the day. I'm quite nervous about this, Liz. There's nothing to be nervous about. It doesn't hurt or anything, Liz replied. I know, but taking a photo and everything. You want to know if the baby's healthy and everything, don't you? Liz asked. Sarah put her hand on her baby and nodded. Well, it's just modern technology. Take advantage of it. Thank you for arranging all this, Liz. I really appreciate it. You're welcome. You and Kate are so lucky to be having babies. Liz's words were strange to Sarah's ears. She'd never considered herself to be lucky to be having a baby at all. It was considered a blessing when a married couple were having a baby, but what was it when an unwed mother was having a baby? Sarah was conflicted whether she should be pleased about it or not. That's a nice thing to say, Liz. No, I mean it. Not all women can have children at all. Maybe I might be one of those women, who knows? So when you find out you're having a baby, you should celebrate whether you have a husband or not. That's all right for Liz to say since she's an Englisher now, Sarah thought. English women might not feel the need to have a husband, but I want to have a real family. I want my children to have a mom and a dad and a proper house. Sarah lay down on the examination table with Liz sitting next to her on a chair. Sarah was already in a white hospital gown, which opened at the back. Now we just need to push this up. The nurse pushed the hospital gown up until Sarah's tummy was exposed. We need to put this gel on your bare tummy. My, you're a lot bigger than I realized, Liz said. The nurse squeezed the gel all over Sarah's bare tummy. Oh, it's so cold, Sarah said. The nurse laughed. Yes, sorry, I know it's cold, but we need to do it so this machine can give us a proper reading. The nurse's attention was on the monitor beside her as she moved the little handheld machine all over Sarah's tummy. Now see there? That's the heart beating. Sarah and Liz could see a fuzzy thing on the screen, which was pulsating in and out. It's so amazing, Liz said. Sarah couldn't even speak and had tears in her eyes as the reality hit her that she would soon have a real live baby in her arms. She glanced at Liz and noticed she was wiping tears out of her eyes as well. It's sounding all healthy and good. Now here's the hand and here's the head. The nurse pointed out all the baby's features to the two girls. Do you want to know if it's a boy or a girl? Yes, Liz shouted. No, I don't want to know yet. No, Liz. All right then. Liz was noticeably disappointed. Once the ultrasound was finished, the nurse handed Sarah 2 black and white photos of her baby. Sarah felt a little strange having a photo as Amish don't have or take photos. However, she had a photo of the baby's dad, so she would keep the photos in the same envelope. Sarah decided to see Kate and tell her about the ultrasound before she went up to her apartment. Kate was still working at the tailor's. Sarah, there you are. Oh no, what now? Sarah thought. What is it? Annie just phoned from Jesse's place. Annie was in Jesse's barn when the phone rang. It was John. He was looking for you. He asked Annie why you haven't written to him and wants to know if you are all right. Sarah found the nearest chair and sat down. She didn't tell him, did she? No, of course not. She just said she didn't know anything about you not writing, and said you were all right, and she would let you know that he called. Why is he calling when he is engaged? Maybe he wants me as well as his English woman. The thought of him calling her when he was engaged to another woman made Sarah think that he was not a very good type of man. She wanted her man to be honorable and faithful to just one woman. You go upstairs, Sarah. I'll bring you up a hot lemon tea as soon as Rebecca comes back. Don't worry, everything will work out, you'll see. Sarah trudged up the stairs. Why was her life suddenly filled with so much drama? At least she knew that her baby was strong and healthy. That's all she wanted to think about for now. Being alone in the apartment, Sarah was able to get so much more quilting done. The old dining table was a perfect size for cutting out all the small pieces of fabric needed for the quilting. She knew that the more she sewed, the more money she could save for her baby. It also meant less time thinking about John. Sarah had made and successfully sold one quilt and was starting her second one. just after opening the tailor's shop 2 mornings later. Sarah was sitting alone in the shop trying to work out why one of the machines had stopped working. She looked up at the sound of the bell over the front door and rose to her feet to greet the customer. Yet this was no customer. She found herself face to face with the very handsome John. Chapter 13. Every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain. Isaiah 40:4. John. Sarah walked to the counter, thankful that there was no way he would be able to see the roundness of her belly under the heaviness of her black shawl. "Hello, Sarah." He smiled as he walked toward her. Sarah's baby seemed to wake up at the sound of his or her father's voice and kicked hard. "What are you doing here?" she asked. She wanted to hold him, but she knew she couldn't. It was an awkward moment and was glad of the bench between the two of them. It didn't help that he was even more handsome than she had remembered. "Why haven't you called me or written me?" he asked. "Should I tell him I know of his engagement? Or should I just tell him I don't want to see him anymore?" All Sarah really wanted was to have his arms around her, yet she fought that impulse. "I phoned you, remember? We arranged that I should phone you to arrange to meet." "It was bad timing, so much has happened," he replied. Sarah shook her head and her voice rose in volume. "I don't know why you are even here. You didn't even mention on the phone about us meeting. I'd arranged for Dad to let me go on Rumspringa, and everything was turning out just like we'd planned it." "A lot's happened, Sarah. Anyway, I'm here now," he said as he reached out his hand to touch her and she pulled away. "Do not touch me. Ephraim said that you're engaged to someone." John hit his head and color rose to his cheeks. "What? And you believed him?" Sarah remained silent and just looked at him, waiting for some sort of an explanation. He owed her that much. "Haven't you read any of my letters?" he asked her. "Some." Sarah didn't know if she could believe anything this Englisher said anyway. She thought she knew him once, but now he could easily have been a stranger. She'd heard so many negative things about people, Englishers in the outside world, so how could she believe anything this man had to say? "Is it true?" John smoothed one large, strong hand through his dark hair. "Can we go somewhere to talk?" he asked. "No, I can't leave the shop. I'm the only one here. Besides, whatever you have to say can be said straight out, right now." He took a deep breath and his strong shoulders lowered slightly as he began. "When I came to the community, I was engaged to someone. That part is true. I wasn't happy. I didn't know whether it was because I should go back to my Amish roots, or whether it was something else that I was dissatisfied about. The moment I met you, I knew that I couldn't marry anyone but you. I called off the engagement with Darlene the moment I got back to Ohio. There are some other things that kept me away as well," he said. Sarah wanted to believe what he was saying, but why had he been so distant on the phone, and why was he turning up now? She wondered if he had heard about the baby. "John, so much time has passed. Why have you come now?" "Ephraim said that there's a rumor going around about you. I just have to know if it's true." Anger rose within Sarah. Ephraim seemed to be in the middle of everything. Ephraim was the one who told her that John was engaged, which caused her not to speak to John, and now he has told John about the baby when he was the last person she wanted to know. "Are you having a baby?" he asked. Sarah was disappointed that her black shawl would not be enough to hide the truth when she was asked a straight-out question by the baby's dad. "It's true, but I want nothing from you." "Sarah, what do you mean you want nothing from me? I love you. Why have you changed?" "It's not me who's changed. We had plans I was going to get my GED and go to college, remember? I was to call you to arrange for us to be together, and you broke those plans, well, delayed them." Sarah regretted believing the words of an Englisher. "I could easily say you did the same thing when you could have come with me at the train station instead of going back with Annie and Jessie. But I kept writing to you," he told her. Sarah thought for a while about how heartbroken John would have been when she had suddenly returned home and not gone to Ohio with him as planned. From his point of view, if what he was saying was true, she was the one who had stopped writing to him. "Well, you were engaged. How would that have worked out?" He replied, "Sarah, I don't know. All I know is that I want you with me, you and the baby." "No, I don't want you with me now. Not now that you've come once you've heard of the baby." John opened his mouth to say something, and Sarah put her hand up firmly in front of him as a sign to hush. She would rather be a single parent and bring the child up alone rather than be with an Englisher out of obligation alone. Sarah considered it perfect timing when Rebecca and Kate walked through the door. John leaned over toward Sarah. "I'm in town and not leaving until you come with me," he said. Sarah leaned in toward him and, matching his hushed tone, said, "You're in for a long stay then." John turned and walked out of the door quickly without acknowledging the two ladies who had just walked in the door. On seeing Sarah's face and the man who had just left, Kate knew that he must have been John. "Sarah, you look as pale as snow. You must sit." Kate hurried over and took Sarah by the arm and sat her down on the nearest chair. "I'll make you a hot lemon drink." "Thank you, Kate." "So that's him then?" Rebecca asked. Sarah simply nodded, and Rebecca patted her on the shoulder and said no more. She had wanted to see John's face for so long, and now she had seen him and she wished she hadn't. At last, she had got her life sorted out and made some plans, and no uncertain promises from an Englisher would ruin those plans. Sarah needed security for her and her baby. It was obvious that he was only appearing now because he heard of the baby. She didn't want to be with him out of duty. Kate handed Sarah the hot tea. "After work today, can I come up and talk to you about an idea I've had?" "Yeah, of course." After her 3 morning hours' work in the shop, Sarah did what she always did when she finished, which was to continue sewing quilts in her apartment. She wondered what Kate would have to say to her. She hoped it would not be more about adoption. Maybe she's found a good family for the baby. No, she hasn't mentioned adoption since that first time. Kate's loud knocking on her door interrupted Sarah's thoughts. "Come in, Kate," Sarah yelled so she wouldn't have to get off her chair. It was getting much harder for her to move around easily. "I've boiled the jug. Do you want lemon tea?" Sarah loved using her electric jug. It was so much quicker than the way they had to boil water back at her mom's place. "That would be nice. You sit. I'll get it for us. I know where everything is," Kate told her. Sarah was thankful to keep sitting, and even though Kate was a little further along than she was, Kate seemed to have much more energy. Most likely because she has less stress than me, Sarah thought. A little while later, Kate brought 2 steaming mugs to the dining table where Sarah was sewing. "I had a good idea as I was falling to sleep last night. Since I'm only a few weeks ahead of you having the baby, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, what if we both go away until the babies are born and I come back with twins?" It took Sarah a little while to work out what Kate was suggesting. "So pretend that my baby is yours and Benjamin's?" "Yeah." Kate nodded and blew on her tea. "You and Benjamin would bring my baby up as your own?" "That's right." Sarah couldn't think of 2 better parents. Her own sister and a man who had grown up next door to her and was like an older brother to her, not just a brother-in-law. Is this God's answer, she thought. "You would do that, Kate?" "Yeah, of course. You could stay in the community and see your baby all the time." Sarah wondered what it would be like to have a baby and pretend it wasn't hers. How would the child feel when once he or she grew up knowing that their real mom was their aunt? There were so many things to consider. "Have you mentioned it to Benjamin?" "Yeah, Benjamin agrees if you are happy with it." Sarah took a sip of tea and thought about it for a while. "Thank you, Kate. It sounds like a very good solution. I will think about it carefully. Tell Benjamin, thank you as well." Kate moved uncomfortably in the chair. "Don't take too long to think about it, Sarah. No one's going to believe that I have one baby and then the twin another 2 or 3 weeks later. It needs to be carefully planned if we're to do this properly." Sarah thought about it for the rest of the night until deciding she wouldn't be able to live with the deception. Even though she was sure Benjamin and Kate would be the very best parents in the world, she just wouldn't be able to do it. Sarah would not be able to visit the baby and pretend to be nothing more than the aunt. It was a good idea of Kate's, but it was something that Sarah couldn't go through with. What if this is what God wants? It's an ideal plan with Kate due nearly the same time as me, and they would be wonderful parents. Sarah went to sleep that night with all the fors and againsts going around and around in her mind until she felt she was going crazy. Chapter 14. "A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another, as I have loved you, that ye also love one another." John 13:33. Sarah was woken up early in the morning by the phone in the tailor shop ringing. It was far too early to be a customer, as it was only 6:30 a.m. Sarah made it down the stairs and into the shop before the phone stopped ringing. It was Benjamin on the phone telling her that they had just had a daughter. Sarah was surprised because the baby wasn't due for another 3 to 4 weeks. "Is the baby all right, Benjamin?" The midwife said to take her to the hospital because she was delivering early, but the hospital said the baby appears to be full term. "We must have got our dates mixed up," he replied. "Oh, that's great. Congratulations, Benjamin. When will she be home?" "She's home now. The hospital let her go as soon as they checked that Kate and the baby were fine. The midwife is going to come and check on them both every day." As soon as Sarah hung up the phone, she phoned Liz. Liz offered to drive her over to see the baby before they both started work for the day. As Sarah was getting ready to wait for Liz outside, it occurred to her that it couldn't have been God's plan to have Kate and Benjamin bring up her baby. If it had been God's plan, then Kate would have somehow been delayed from having the baby so soon. No, it's clear that was not God's plan for my baby. I wonder what God's plan is. Sarah was pleased that she would no longer have to struggle with the idea of her sister bringing her baby up as her own. That was one less worry off her plate. However, it was one less option available to her as well. "Kate!" Liz yelled as she walked through the open door and proceeded straight through to Kate's bedroom. Sarah followed close behind her. Kate was standing up, changing the baby girl's nappy. Both girls kissed and congratulated Kate. "She's so tiny and so beautiful," Sarah said as she gazed at the tiny toes and the tiny little fingers with perfect little miniature fingernails. "She's gorgeous. I want to put a big pink bow in her hair," Liz said. Kate laughed. "There'll be none of that fanciness for this little girl. Besides, she hardly has any hair." Kate covered her up with a small white blanket and put a little white knitted bonnet on her head to keep out the cold. "We've called her Hannah. Hannah Elizabeth Yoder." "After Mom and Grandmother, that's so lovely." Sarah thought Kate to have the most wonderful life. She had the security of a good man, a house, and now she had a beautiful baby. "Can I hold her?" It had been a long time since Sarah had held a baby, and it seemed strange to her that she would suddenly have her own baby to take care of. Kate handed her to Sarah. "Mind her neck. They don't have strong necks to start with." Liz leaned down and smelled Hannah's head. "Oh, doesn't she smell good?" Sarah smelled her as well. "She's so cute, Kate." Seeing Kate's tiny new baby made Sarah all the more keen for her own baby to arrive. How those last few weeks were dragging by. "Sorry that the idea I had won't work out for you now, Sarah." Sarah put her arm around Kate. "Thank you that you and Benjamin were willing to do that for me, but it obviously was not meant to be." The next 10 minutes were spent explaining to Liz the idea that Kate had about bringing up Sarah's baby as her own. Liz thought that it would have been a most suitable arrangement. As both girls were just about to leave, Kate said, "Oh, Sarah, I nearly forgot. Mom and Dad want you to go to dinner tomorrow night at home." Sarah pulled up in the taxi outside the house that used to be hers. How odd it felt to be going there now as a visitor. It had only been a few weeks since she'd been there, but she'd forgotten, or maybe she'd never realized how truly pretty the house was from the outside. It was all white and 2 stories high, with a handsome porch running the full length of 2 sides of the house. Some flowers were just coming into bloom now that winter was over. As Sarah stepped on the porch, she noticed that it was swept clean. That was a chore that used to be hers. Her father yelled, "Come in! Your mom's in the kitchen." She saw her dad in his usual chair reading the budget, which was the only thing she'd ever seen him read besides the Bible. "Hello, Dad. What do you think of your new granddaughter?" Her father put his reading material down. "She's truly a blessing. She looks the same as Kate at that age," her father said. Sarah was a little emotional as she wondered whether her mom and dad would treat her child differently to Kate's child, since her child would be born out of wedlock, and to an Englisher. "I'll go and help Mom in the kitchen." "No, sit down, I have something to say," he told her. From the tone of his voice, Sarah knew she was here for more than just dinner. "Maybe they want to coax me to go and talk to the bishop." Sarah sat down in one of the 2 big wooden chairs next to her dad. "What is it?" she asked. "I'll get straight to the point. Since you won't have a wedding like your 2 sisters, I may as well give this to you now." Her dad handed her a thick envelope. Sarah took the envelope from his hands and looked inside. She was shocked to see a bundle of cash neatly folded in 2. "What is this?" That was to be your dowry. You have it now to help with your baby," he said. Dad, I can't. It's too much." Her dad leaned forward toward her as if to emphasize his point. "Your mom and I have had to save the dowry for 3 girls. Since there is no husband to give it to, you take it to help with your baby. We want you to have it, and you must take it since you won't be having a husband." The words "won't be having a husband" cut Sarah deeply, but it was a fact, and a fact that she had to get used to. Sarah leaned forward and hugged her dad. "Thank you so much. This will help the baby so much. There are so many things I need for him or her. Now go and help your mom while I keep reading this." He smiled and held up the budget. After Sarah talked with her mom about Kate's new baby, she noticed that the house was so much quieter with Liz gone. That was until Jacob came running in straight through the front door and into the kitchen. "Sarah?" He gave Sarah a hug. "You've got fat." He poked her lightly in the tummy. "I'm fat, all right." Sarah was not in the mood for a conversation on the reason she was fat. He had already found out some time ago that she was having a baby, and that's all she wanted him to know of the subject for now. Their mom left off mashing the potatoes for a moment to scold Jacob. "Hush, Jacob. Go and talk to your dad while we finish dinner and take those dirty boots off at once." "Yeah, Mom." Jacob turned to take his boots off at the back door. Sarah brought the dinner plates out from the utility room and placed them on the dining table. "Thank you so much for the money, Mom. You might as well put it to good use. It won't be easy bringing up a baby by yourself, but better to be by yourself than running off with an Englisher who might take you away from God." Sarah had been brought up with a mom and dad who truly loved each other. She wondered whether all Amish married couples were in love or whether they married out of convenience. It's not like there's millions of men to choose from like in the English world. She knew that Kate and Benjamin had been truly in love before they got married. Annie and Jessie were also in love, but what of other Amish couples? Sarah considered it very hard to tell whether a couple was in love or not, since no Amish folk showed affection or the likes in public. While Sarah set the table, a smile came to her face as she was reminded of some advice her mother gave her years ago regarding men. If you're late getting dinner, then set the table because when he walks in the door and sees that the table is set, he thinks that dinner won't be far away. Sarah could hardly see that she would ever need to use that advice, not now. Another thing she remembered her mom saying was, "If you have something important to discuss with your husband or you want to ask for something, always do it after he has had a good meal." "What are you smiling at? I haven't seen you smiling much in the last few months," her mom said. "Just thinking of men. Were you in love with Dad when you married him?" Her mom took a deep breath and lowered her shoulders. "I knew your dad was a good man, and his heart was strong in faith toward God. I also knew he was hardworking. That was really all I knew of him." Sarah stopped what she was doing and looked at her mom in shock. She was sure that they would have been most deeply in love before they married. "So you mean you didn't love him when you got married?" "Depends what you mean by love. I had the love of God for him as to all God's people," her mother replied. "You know what I mean, Mom. Romantic love." "No, I think it is a mistake to wait for some giddy feeling. You want a man whose heart is right toward God and who is kind and a hard worker." Her mom shook her head. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I didn't think I would need to tell you something, which to me is so obvious." "That's maybe where I went wrong. I got carried away with the notion and the feelings that John gave me rather than look for a man who would stay with me forever. I needed to be more practical and look at my long-term future. I got carried away with romance, which isn't real. Or maybe if it is real, it doesn't last forever." Chapter 15. "By whom also we have access by faith into this grace wherein we stand, and rejoice in hope of the glory of God." Romans 5:2. 1 week later, John came to the shop again. It was early in the morning and shortly after opening time. Both Rebecca and Kate were in the workroom sewing. Rebecca approached him when he walked through the door, and he asked to speak to Sarah. "Just do one thing for me, please, Sarah," John said. Sarah was embarrassed to be speaking in front of both Rebecca and Kate, who could obviously hear all that they were saying. "What is it?" "Come to dinner with me tonight so we can talk?" he asked. Sarah thought that might be a good thing to straighten things out so he could finally go home and also so they wouldn't have to talk in front of other people. "Okay." His blue eyes twinkled as he smiled, which set Sarah's heart racing. Why doesn't he love me like I love him? I can't be with him now. Not like this. John took Sarah to a quiet restaurant at the edge of the town. I need you to be straight with me, Sarah. I need to know why you keep pushing me away. Sarah remained silent while she gathered her thoughts. The waitress came over with the menus, but neither of them was very hungry, and just ordered a salad each for them. John waited for the waitress to leave before he spoke again. Do you still love me? Sarah felt all the air leave her body as she involuntarily sighed. She couldn't say that she didn't love him. It's not that, John. I don't want you to be with me just for the baby. I want you to love me for me. I want to be enough for you without the baby. You've only come here when you heard about the baby. You didn't come for me. John put his hand forward to hold Sarah's, but she pulled away from his touch. There was a reason I couldn't come here before now. John shifted in his seat and looked very uncomfortable. I didn't want to worry you with my problems, nor do I now. He was disturbed about something, so Sarah didn't interrupt and gave him some time to speak. My mom got sick. She passed away and I came here straight from her funeral, he said. Sarah opened her mouth in shock at his devastating news. At that moment, the waitress placed bread in front of them. John picked up a knife and buttered some bread. Please understand, Sarah, that I couldn't have you come to me when I was taking care of my mother. I didn't want you around all that sickness, he said. Sarah liked the fact that John looked after his mother when she was sick. That showed her that he was a good man. She only wished that she had known that before now. I didn't need attention, John. Anyway, why didn't you just tell me what was going on? John reached out to hold her hand, and this time she let him. I explained it all to you in my last few letters, he said. When you stopped writing to me, I got scared and thought I'd better tell you everything. At first, I didn't want to burden you with my troubles. I'm an only child, so I'm used to doing everything my own way. Sarah started to make sense as she pieced all the information together. She wished she hadn't jumped to so many wrong conclusions, and now she wished she had read his last onslaught of letters. How did you know where I was and know about the baby? Ephraim, he said. Sarah nodded. Of course Ephraim would have told him. I stopped at Ephraim's on the way and he told me the rumors surrounding you, he said. He also told me where to find you. Please believe me, I was on my way to take you away with me before I even knew about the baby. Sarah studied John's face. She really wanted to believe all the things he said, but she didn't want to let herself get into a position where he would be able to hurt her again. I even had this for you, Sarah, from a long time ago, the day after you left me at that train station. John let go of Sarah's hand and pulled a diamond ring out of his pocket. I bought this the day you left me at the train station. I knew we would be together one day. Sarah looked at the ring but did not touch it, even though he was handing it out for her to take. Oh, it's a pretty ring, John, but Amish don't wear jewelry. It had a large round diamond in the center with smaller diamonds set all the way around the band. She didn't want to seem ungrateful, but in her heart she was a plain woman and not a woman to wear jewelry of any sort. Sarah wanted a commitment from the heart, not a trinket, no matter how much it cost. John placed the ring on the table. What are you saying? Are you going back to the community? He asked. Sarah nodded. Yeah, I think I might after the baby is born. I will make a confession to the bishop and he may let me go back. Sarah doubted that would ever happen, yet it was a secret hope that it just might happen. John took hold of Sarah's hand once more. I don't think they would let you back in, Sarah. Not from what I know about the Amish. Sarah's eyes fell down to the food in front of her. He was most likely right. The Amish wouldn't let her back in with a baby alone. But with a husband and a baby, they just might. What about us, Sarah? You're the only thing that kept me going when my mother was sick. I love you so much, he told her as he leaned over and kissed her hand that he was still holding on to. Sarah knew that John obviously couldn't be with her because of his sick mother, but he could have at least told her about it when she called him that time when they were to arrange to be together. She would have understood that he couldn't be there. At least it would have been better than wondering why he was so distant to her and trying to only guess why his letters had been so brief. You abandoned me when I needed you. I've had to feel so much shame and embarrassment for being an unwed expectant mother. I'm here now, Sarah. I promise to never ever leave you again. The words that John was speaking were the words that Sarah had always wanted him to say. This was everything Sarah had ever dreamt of. She knew there would be no space ever in her heart for another man, and her baby would need 2 parents. "I'll do anything, Sarah. Anything you want me to do, just say you'll be mine. Marry me?" he asked. "Would you return to the Amish for me?" John's face suddenly changed into a very sour expression. "I believe in God, that's why I tried out living the Amish lifestyle. But it has too many rules that I couldn't make sense of or see any reason for. For example, I don't see why you have to live without electricity and work so hard," he told her. "It's all about being separate away from the English world. With electricity and that sort of thing come other things that may pull you away from God." John nodded, but Sarah could see it still didn't make any sense to him at all. "John, my faith is important to me, and I couldn't be with someone who didn't believe in God." "I do believe. If that is what I have to do for us to be together, then yes, I will even do that. I will join the Amish if we can be together," he said. Sarah was pleased he believed in God because they had never had any in-depth conversation regarding their faith before. She assumed he did believe in God, and that's why he was trying out to see if he could live like an Amish person when he was staying with his cousin Ephraim. Sarah thought of their future together and laughed. "How about we just live very close to my family to start with before we think about trying to join the community? We can take things one step at a time." John let out a deep breath, which was more a sigh of relief. "Yes, that would be a lot better. Say you'll marry me then? I can't lose you again," he said. Sarah was about to answer him when she felt her waters break. She stood up with fright and looked down to see a puddle of water underneath her and all over the restaurant chair. "My water just broke," she said. John also sprang to his feet. "Is the baby coming now?" he asked. "Yeah." 9 hours later. "Push, Sarah, push," the nurse instructed. Sarah had no idea it would be this hard. She had rejected all the modern drugs offered by the hospital, opting for a natural birth with as little intervention as possible. However, Sarah wished she had been able to have her baby at home, as these surroundings were sterile and cold. All Sarah could see everywhere she turned was stainless steel. Between the contractions, the nurse said, "Not long now, maybe just one more big push and you'll be done." The next contraction came in a crescendo, and with all the strength that Sarah had, she bared down and somehow managed to push the baby out. She saw a flash of pink skin and heard loud cries. The baby was immediately picked up by a nurse and wrapped in a blanket before being handed to Sarah. "You have a very healthy baby girl." The nurse carefully lay the baby down on Sarah's chest. "Oh, she's so beautiful." Sarah had never felt so much love in her life. She kept looking at her, amazed at the miracle of life. She touched her baby's hand that was outstretched and touched the soft skin of her face. The baby's eyes were open, and she was looking around the room as if she was trying to work out where she was. "Can you let the father in now?" The nurse opened the door, and John came tumbling in as if he'd been standing against the door the whole time. "She's a girl," Sarah said as John walked toward them. John kissed Sarah on the cheek. "Well done, Sarah. She's just beautiful, like her mom." John stroked the baby's cheek. "I can't believe I'm a dad." "So this little girl interrupted you when you were about to answer my question before. Sarah Miller, will you marry me?" Sarah turned her face up toward John. "Do you mean that?" Sarah looked at John's face, then looked at her baby's face and smiled at how similar the little one looked to her dad. "Yes, John Zook, I will marry you." "Oh, Sarah, you've made me the happiest, most blessed man in the world. We can be a real family. You, me, and... Have you thought of a name?" he asked. Sarah looked at her baby to see if a name sprang to mind. "Why don't we call her after your mom?" John kissed his baby again, softly on the top of her head. "Thank you, Sarah, that will be very special. Miriam Sarah Zook. My mother's name and your name, what do you think?" he asked. "That's just perfect." Sarah never wanted to forget these special moments. She wanted to remember every little detail. It was clear that John was going to be a great father to their baby, and that was something that until now, Sarah had never been sure of. "Can I pick her up?" he asked. Sarah laughed. "Of course. You don't have to ask me. You're her dad." John sat on the edge of the hospital bed and carefully took baby Miriam from Sarah. John rocked her in his arms from side to side. "I feel I should sing a song, but I don't know any baby songs. I'll have to learn." Sarah laughed. I'm sure Miriam wouldn't know what a baby song was anyway. Look at her looking at me. She's looking right into my face. Sarah saw that Miriam did appear to be looking straight at her father, even though babies weren't supposed to focus their eyes right away. Right now, I feel like the luckiest man in the world. We are both very blessed, John. Both of us. I don't think luck has anything to do with it, he told her. A tear ran down Sarah's cheek. She had a beautiful baby and the man she loved. It may not have happened in a perfect way, but God had forgiven her, and he had made a way for her where there was no way. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. Genesis 8:22. You have been listening to A Small Secret. Amish Romance Secrets, Book 3. Written by Samantha Price. Narrated by Susanna Coleman. Copyright 2014 by Samantha Price. Production copyright 2023 by Samantha Price.